Please welcome to the stage CEO and co-founder of Collision and Web Summit, Paddy Cosgrave.
Wow. How is everybody? Did people go out last night? Some. That's good. Very responsible. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'm going to, for those of you who in the audience has never been to Web Summit, for example, put up your hand if you've never been to a Web Summit. It's a lot of people, a lot of opportunity. Who here has, is this your first time at any conference that we've organized? Just put up your hand. Great. So I'm going to give you a tiny bit of background. About 7 years ago, I started with two of my friends a small startup conference in Ireland. About 400 people showed up, all Irish, and the second year about 800 people showed up. And it wasn't until 2012 that the first trickle of people from outside of Ireland began to show up. And I, as an entrepreneur, had been to a lot of technology conferences around the world, and I just had my own sense of what might work for entrepreneurs and for those interested in technology. And we had a particular formula that was focused not just on the execution and the design of a venue and the design of content, but also on software as well. And from 2012, really until last year, things just grew very, very fast. Last year, we welcomed just over 50,000 people to Web Summit in Lisbon, and overall, just under about 100,000 people to our events around the world, in Hong Kong and here last year for the first time. For those of you that have never been here before, if you take out your app on your phone, that is the most powerful thing that you actually possess. We have a lot of engineers, a lot of data scientists that work throughout the year building the technology that has, I think, allowed our events become more efficient for people all over the world, and as a consequence, something that people want to come to and come back to many times. If you look at your recommendations, over the next few minutes, if they haven't already changed, they're going to change. In the run-up to Collision, most of the recommendations you would have been served, and the most important thing is that you connect your phone book, and after that I'd say Twitter, and after that possibly Facebook. But your phone book is ultimately one of the most powerful it is the most powerful graph that you possess. The recommendations that we will have mostly served you up until right about now have focused on people that you likely already know. And the reason we're doing that is before the conference kicks off, we're trying to help you find people to connect with that are already likely in your existing social circle. From here on in, we begin to mix that up slightly, and we start pushing recommendations to you internal to the app of people you probably don't know, but we think, looking at billions and billions of data points, these are people that you should possibly meet, or speakers or talks that you might like and benefit from meeting and listening to. So I'd really encourage you to embrace the app. It's incredibly powerful, and it helps people at Web Summit in particular make the best use out of what is a very large gathering of people. That's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you so much for coming, and I really hope you enjoy the next 3 days. So joining us on stage now, the founder of MZ, creator of smash hits, Game of War, Fire Age, and Mobile Strike, featuring such celebrities as Arnold Schwarzenegger, Kate Upton, and Mariah Carey. To talk through his plans for further dominance beyond mobile gaming, please welcome to the stage in conversation with Rob Pegoraro from Yahoo Finance, Gabe Leiden.
Good morning. Everyone slept well last night? Had an early night in, being a school night and everything? So, let's talk about the big idea you had behind Game of War, by which I don't mean engineering a colossal time suck for everyone with a smartphone.
Well, Machine Zone has been making apps that connect millions of people together in a single virtual environment for our entire existence. And with Game of War, we wanted to take it into a real-time one. So we made some unique technologies that allowed us to network tens of millions of devices into a single game. And we layered in some technologies that we're pretty famous for around real-time translation, so we could actually have a cohesive environment where anybody in the world can download the game on an Android or iOS device and be able to communicate and play with literally anyone, anywhere in real time. So that technology that we developed, we think is actually pretty special. And we have now released a platform we call Satori, Satori.com, which allows any developer to share tremendous amounts of data across the internet to millions of subscribers for free. We have taken the cost of messaging at scale, sharing information across the internet, to essentially zero, and we're allowing any developer to share beyond Twitter scale, beyond WhatsApp scale, data streams to anyone.
There's no equivalent of the fail whale for Satori?
No, it's a distributed, very fault tolerant system, a very fast messaging system, with the goal of creating essentially a single feed of the internet. So I want to give you an example. I have a video of one of the first applications or examples of what we've done. So this is, when you think about the world of news right now, news is this highly distributed ecosystem, millions of websites sharing information. It's so big that we can't keep track of it all. And then we have these new problems like fake news. What fake news is news on the internet is so big, we don't know where news is coming from anymore. So what we've done here is we've subscribed to every single RSS feed on the internet. And we're republishing it as a single stream of information. So what you see right there is a real-time view of all news on the internet. All of it.
What are people saying about us right now?
Well, it's a video.
Okay.
But it's also queryable, and you can write artificial intelligence on this. This is an environment. It's not just messaging. So if you'll notice, we have some visualizations around things like a word cloud. You can now put, if you share information through RSS, we are subscribing to it and republishing out in this big, what we call big RSS. This is a programmable environment. It's not just a stream of information you can subscribe to. You can also write code to it. So now you can get things like a word cloud on the internet, the real-time internet. So the purpose of what we're trying to display here is that these big disparate systems, things with 20 million, 50 million endpoints, publishing information, the way that we look at the internet now is we see it as, I think about it as like ground level. We look around, we almost don't see the end of the internet. There's too many sources of information. This allows you to zoom out so high that it turns it into just a single stream of info. So what we've essentially done here is we've taken a public protocol, RSS, and with one engineer in 2 weeks, we've nullified it. There's no need for it anymore. You just subscribe to this single feed, and you have all of it, and it's queryable, and you can write artificial intelligence on top of it. So we think this is a tremendous news resource. There's nothing like this available on the internet, period. This is more powerful than Twitter. This is the most powerful news resource on the internet, hands down, because it's programmable. You can write logic. You can sort it all in real time, and it's free.
So where does the money come in?
I want to create a public space for real-time information, and I want to broadcast it all in a single programmable feed. The basic thesis is that the internet itself, the way that traffic works on the internet is the client, your iPhone, sends data through a network. The network manages that data, sends it to a server, and then that server is essentially an application. I want to view a present view of the internet, a present view of everything, absolutely everything. And if you zoom out far enough and we put a computer in the network, the internet itself turns into just a single stream of information because that's what it is. And I want to make that stream of information programmable and filterable.
Now, the phrase total information awareness crept into my mind when you were first talking about this last night, like the old National Security Agency program. But this is something that
This is an open,
People
free,
use for good
this
and
is
not
an
evil.
This is an open, free feed of information. Anybody can publish into it. So we're building a network layer that allows anyone to share tremendous amounts of information, not just a text, not just a photo, raw data streams at incredible volumes. So right now, a free account on Satori can publish 200,000 messages per second. So that's Twitter at peak volume is 100,000. So it's 2 Twitters on 1 free account. So this is huge volume. This is tremendous volume.
I'm not sure if we want to have President Trump publishing into this system.
Well, he's not fast enough.
Getting into enough trouble already.
So another way I think about it is that since the internet itself is just a stream of information, that's all it is, that's being distributed out to servers and clients, we are creating essentially an exchange that allows operations the same way a high-frequency trader works. So now you can go put logic into that stream. So the network is going to become smart. It's the only dumb part of the internet. The network is just a dumb switchboard that you can't program any logic into, and I think that's going to change. I think fundamentally what we represent is a change in that what the internet is capable of doing.
So let's talk a practical example. Apparently, one of the first uses of this, totally logical pivot from mobile games. Transportation in New Zealand.
Mobile games, mobile games is, if you think about it from as a device, it's the largest IoT network in the world, mobile games. Billions, 3 billion devices, and all my apps are free. So and I do a lot of marketing. So if a lot of people download my app and I'm trying to maintain a single virtual environment, that means I'm trying to network millions of devices into one real-time world. It's a very impractical problem. There's no it's not accounting software, it's not medical software. You're trying to create this.
Someone wanting to build their grains of sand database, that would be really helpful for that.
What it's helpful for is managing extremely large systems. This isn't built for a small application. This platform is built beyond the application layer. This is going into the network layer. So another example, just a quick view, is something you could do right now for free. So this is Twitter. This is an app that we built just a few weeks ago that allows you to translate. You can also put everything into categorize. You can categorize a tweet as an opinion. You can categorize it as a news source. You can categorize it as happy, sad. You can translate.
So a lot of marketing ties to be all over that feature.
Well, you could treat Twitter as just a simple data stream, and you can write logic to it and sort it however you want in real time. The cool thing about what it is, how you work with this, is essentially it's just SQL queries. So once the data is structured and running through the system, you're just writing SQL. It's all executed immediately. All you have to do is essentially write your query, press enter, get a chart ready, and you'll start printing results instantaneously. It's instant filtering, instant logic on extreme volumes of information. So what we've done, so you see kind of like news and analytics. Here's what we've done for New Zealand. So we partnered with the government of New Zealand, and we are going to network in the city of in Queenstown. We're going to network the entire public transportation infrastructure into one live ecosystem. So that means the buses and the ferries and how many people are on the planes and the taxi cabs will all go into one feed, just like what we saw with Big RSS. All of that information will be put into one public feed, and computation on that feed will be free, which is sponsored by New Zealand, the government, to provide a single IoT infrastructure for the country. So a developer is going to subscribe to a feed called New Zealand. And anybody who subscribes to that feed will get all of the public information out of New Zealand into that single queryable, programmable feed. So what this allows us to do is you create an environment. So right now the way IoT works is someone will sell you a stoplight system, someone will sell you a bus system, and you'll have apps for all of these things. This is an orchestration layer that allows you to connect essentially practically unlimited number of devices into this super fast, ultra high volume data feed to create a single system called New Zealand, because that's what it is. If you want to network all of these things together, if you want to have a cohesive experience where the buses can talk to the trains, can talk to the taxi cabs, and they're all in one live environment, you need something that can handle tremendous amounts of real-time information. So New Zealand is our first beta, and what we hope to achieve there is the first live country where any retailer, bar owner, any developer can publish New Zealand public information into this essentially public utility stream called New Zealand. And any developer around the world can subscribe to that and start writing interesting apps on top of it.
So this is how, I guess, Yelp will not be unhappy about this because they too can subscribe to this and
anybody can
parse out the data as
yeah,
they wish.
anybody can. So the cost of messaging and doing computing on live data, we're going to take that down to the point where anybody in the world can work with any volumes of information easily. It's just, like I said, it's a simple SQL query. You're going to start querying essentially the live internet. Right now, we look at the internet through the lens of a database, not the lens of a network. And I think that's what we're going to start changing. We're going to say, I want to know what's happening right now across the entire internet, and I want to know it continuously, all the time, constantly getting the information, however I define it.
So when will I be able to get off a plane in Auckland and, I guess, ask
So I'll
my
give you,
phone the
I'll
equivalent
give you
of
a
what's
good
up, New
example. So
Zealand?
right now, their equivalent of the FAA has, they know how many people are on every plane. They have the passenger numbers, right? So they don't share that information. So now what they'll have is the plane has 52 passengers. The taxi cabs at the airport will know how many people are getting off of the plane. They'll have an application that'll see that, and they'll be able to adjust taxi cab liquidity accordingly. So if they don't have
Uber
enough,
can ramp up its surge pricing at the same time.
well, I don't know about that, but that's up to them. But they'll actually, what they'll have is a public, everyone will have a public space for them to see what's happening inside of their environment, because we're adding these devices. We're going to be adding trillions of devices to our world. How are you going to interact with them all? Where's the system? Where's the public space for us to interact with the entire real-time world that we're creating right now? Because we're creating the devices, but where's the orchestration for all of this
We do
stuff?
need a positive example, because so far the most public examples have been hacked IoT devices, which are being orchestrated at scale by the bad guys.
But hardware is different than the network. Network I can write code on my network. If my device is out there and I can't update it, that's a problem. I can filter those things out live on the servers, right? So you're going to get a layer, an orchestration layer that is better, is open, is scalable, and it actually provides an environment first. We need an IoT environment before we need devices. Because right now, where do the devices go? What do they talk to? Right? So now that we have an environment, every time we're going to add a device to New Zealand, it's not a question of where it goes. It goes into the New Zealand feed, and any developer that subscribes to it automatically gets it. They don't have to do anything. They're subscribed to it, and they just start noticing their server starts getting different, new pieces of information that didn't get before. So now you have a very structured way to grow a smart country. But ultimately, New Zealand is just a subset of the internet. I think it's inevitable is that all of that can be put into a single stream. The internet itself is just a stream of information. It's just not read and written to. It's handled through a dumb switchboard that sends traffic to a server, essentially. I think that switchboard is about to be, I know it's going to become smart. So that is going to be the network itself is about to become programmable. Cloud computing is going to, all computing right now is post-network. All of it is. Computing is going to start moving into the endpoints of the internet. Right when data touches the internet, it will already be read and written to immediately, as soon as it touches the internet, not once it travels to your server. I think that's definitely the future, and it's something that's going to happen really soon, probably next 2 years.
So one thing I have to ask, any time a publishing platform gets popular enough, it gets spam. How will your system with real-time publishing deal with that?
So what's great, we can write logic. We can write logic directly. So anomaly detection is going to be a really big thing. So so think about the network right now. Like, why does DDoS exist? The DDoS exists because the network is stupid. You get a bunch of bots that say, send traffic to this server, and the network doesn't even know what's going on. It doesn't know that there's a million bots sending. It's just a network that sends information. It'll be very easy to deal with that in the near future because it'll be obvious that it's a bot attack and they can just cut it off right at the source. You don't need to have a system post-network, which is how it works right now. So it's the dumbest part of the internet, and it's also the biggest part. It's where all of the total summation of the internet is in the network. That's where it all is. If you wanted to view into everything, you're going to have to build a computer in the network. Otherwise, it's just going to get split up across billions of applications. So what Satori represents is a new change in app development, the way that we deal with data, the way that we deal with the world, the way that our expectation of how many devices and how interactive the world can get, because it can get extremely interactive.
So I meant to ask, where did the name Satori come from, besides having a domain name available by that?
It's a Japanese, it's a Japanese, it's awareness. That's essentially what it is.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good branding.
Yeah, we like it.
So I guess give me some examples of how would this sort of system make this conference different in 2 years or whatever.
Oh, okay, great example. So first, if you had just doing this on the fly, if you're having a mobile app, right, things like broadcasting your location. Let's just say you want to talk to press because you're a startup, right? And they don't know where you are, right? This is something that's actually really easy to fix. So you can have a little button
that
says...
That's like 50% of my South by Southwest traffic. Where are you?
Yeah.
I'm in here.
So you can have if you want to share your location publicly, you would have a button on your application that you would just press and say, I'm here. The conference would have a live map of everyone saying where they are, and you would have a search query be able to say, where is this person, or where was this person shared last, right? So that's one example. Communication at scale, if there's 20,000 people here, and they want to share things like live video, live location, live chat, live audio, we can actually structure that into one group conversation rather than several different ones. And we can write bots on it that show you what interesting things people are saying or doing as it's happening. So if somebody
sort
said...
of automated FOMO?
Well, yeah.
FOMO as a service.
Yeah, exactly. So if I said, hey, I want to know if Gabe ever shares his location because I want to find him. And I said, okay, fine. And then one day I said, all right, I want everybody who's looking for me to find me. I go and I press my button and I share the information. The whole conference can get an alert instantaneously to say, this is where he is, if that's what you want to do.
I don't think I want to use that feature.
Well,
actually.
some people do. A startup person will.
Right.
Right? There's a lot of people that will want to use that. So what it'll allow you to do, and there's different types of IoT devices too. There's IoT devices, so a lot of these tags, they have RFID chips in them, right? So you can start saying how many people checked in. The person running the conference can actually have a real-time view of how many people are at a certain talk. If there's not enough, if the chair is empty for some reason, which never happens at Collision, but
right.
if it was empty for some reason, they could go grab someone from the hallway and say, hey, we know that we've got 10 empty seats. Go in there and watch this great talk.
Actually, that would be helpful, yeah. How many stages do we have?
A bunch.
Yeah.
We have a lot.
You're
so you have to think about it, like Collision itself is just, it's a lot of independent devices and people and a lot of unstructured information that we can structure into a live feed that I'd call Collision, and then we would write code directly to that feed.
And so you've also got this challenge, developer challenge running for Satori?
Yeah, so Satori is so we haven't even really talked about apps yet. We're mainly talking about public information, and there's a lot of data feeds that we will be handling in the near future. This isn't really it's not really SaaS or cloud. This is like a new type of computer that lives in a network.
You got to find a buzzword.
Yeah, it's hard because we've got to make a new one up, but it's different developers see it in different ways because you can do a lot of different things with it. It's very, very powerful. And we're building an extremely large network to handle a lot of data. So what we're looking for is creative people that can show the world what can you do when you network the world together in a single stream of information. So one of the projects that we're seeing that we're watching really closely is someone is getting I don't know who it is, but someone is building all of the live public data streams from India. Everything they can possibly find, from traffic, pollution, there's some medical stuff, there's all kinds of interesting things that are being shared from the government and from private corporations. And they're going to make a single live feed of every public resource of India. And I'm really curious what kind of applications are going to come out of that. I think it's going to have I think this is going to have a really big impact on the world in general. Right now, when we use apps, we always look at them through the lens of a database all the time. That's the only way we see things. So it's all historical. Everything's historical. The internet is really bad at live experiences. It's really bad at it. It's hard. Where's the application where I can interact with 100,000 people? You know, it's really, really bad at it. Yet there's 3 billion people connected to it, but you would never know it. You would never know if I go on my phone right now, where's the experience that shows me there's 3 billion people online right now? It doesn't exist. So that's going to be the big change. It's not going to be 3 billion, it's going to be 100 billion devices and my ability to interact with all of them at once.
So keeping focus will be the big challenge, huh?
No, it's the same concept. It's the same concept. It's just different apps are built off of that concept. What we're doing is saying we want to process in order billions and billions and billions of messages per second and allow developers to be able to slice and dice that up however they see fit.
Okay. Our time is up.
Okay, thank you.
You set yourself a big challenge there. Good luck.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning. My name is Chris Schultz. I'm the co-host of Collision, and I'll be with you much of the day today. How many people walked over here this morning? What a beautiful day out there today, right? One of the things I love about New Orleans is that when you're walking around on the street in a beautiful morning like this, we say good morning to each other. Good morning. In San Francisco, it kind of freaks people out saying good morning to people on the street, but we love doing that in New Orleans. So let's try that one more time. Good morning. Thanks. Next up, we'll hear from the CTOs of the Coca-Cola Company and Blackstone on the evolution of IT within large-scale organizations, with insight into the challenges and opportunities. In conversation with Brian Barrett of Wired, please welcome to the stage Blackstone's Bill Murphy and Coca-Cola's Alan Bain. Welcome.
Thank you. So, I'd like to just jump right in with it. I'm glad we're leading off with IT because it's such an important thing that affects, I think, everybody here in some capacity. And Bill, I'd like to start with a quote from you. You at one point said, and I want to start with this because I think it frames us up well, and it also name drops Alan's company. So it'll bring us both in. Said if Coca-Cola had a brand that was the equivalent of IT today, they would kill it and start again. So I'm hoping you might be able to elaborate a little bit on that in terms of, what is the perception of IT today versus the reality, and how can it improve in both respects?
Sure. The perception, I think, is generally bad, right? Because there's been, technology projects are hard. They were certainly harder in the past. I think they're getting slightly easier to deliver, but people have been disappointed over many times, and it's really not necessarily the fault of technologists, but the technologists haven't stood up for themselves to make the case on why it's difficult or why they need full engagement from their customers and their users in order to deliver things. So they've taken the brunt of such of all kind of anything delayed for the past 20 years is IT's fault. And I think we need to figure out a way out of that because the partnership is degraded by this perception, and it creates shadow IT, it creates bad behavior in terms of people engaging with you in the right way in order to deliver projects. And all that is not good for anybody.
I like that you use the word partnership because I think that's a way that a lot of people on the other side of it don't necessarily think of it, right? So how do you sort of encourage the idea of, look, IT is a partnership between the workers and the people behind the technology, and Alan at Coke, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with that. There's such a sprawling organization, a lot of people to work with, a lot of moving parts.
At Coca-Cola, we have an ecosystem is what we look at it. The Coca-Cola company itself is actually very small. The bottling system, our suppliers, and all make it large. So, on a percentage basis, We are the largest logistics company in the world. We have more trucks on the road than FedEx, DHL, UPS. We are actually the size of a regional bank with about $1 billion in profit. So we're a conglomerate. It takes the system, and we have to partner with everybody, our suppliers, our internal customers, our bottlers, our external customers, in order to make this work. And collaboration is really the key. You're never going to be able to pull everybody together for consensus, but if you can get to a collaborative model, then you have a good chance at making it there.
So I just want to poke a little bit more at this idea of a collaborative model and these partnerships and how to foment those. Is it about getting people involved earlier in the process and having more transparency behind it? Or is it more about being clear up front, look, we need to do this, and this is what the benefit's going to be at the end?
I think that it's about creating a dialogue around the problem identification, not necessarily jumping to a solution that somebody believes is the right one. And it's very much a cultural issue, more than it is a specific project-by-project issue. If you can face off with people where you're asking, how can I help you, or what is the problem that you're experiencing, rather than immediately jumping to, oh, I need it to look like this, or I need something that's going to do this, then you can get into a place where the innovations group, the technology group, is creating something that's even better than the expectations of the person who's asking you for it. And most of the time, I think the technology groups don't push back hard enough in terms of creating that type of conversation. Maybe they start, or they get tired, and we're still developing the skill sets inside of technology orgs in order to sell the fact that that is the way you need to engage in order to deliver great stuff.
And you mentioned the technology skill set, which is, I think, a good segue into something else I want to talk about, which is that you can't really revolutionize IT and build up those competencies and have those skill sets unless you can find enough qualified workers. So what I want to talk about a little bit now is your views on, especially with an administration that has immigration policies that are a definite shift from the past, and also the U.S. maybe not having as much of a STEM pipeline as it possibly could. So Alan, how do you see that in your work when you're trying to hire qualified people? Are you worried about the next few years based on those factors?
In general, I'm worried, but I'm also encouraged at the same time. And the reason is that we are a global company. We're not U.S.-centric. We have technology people in all parts of the world. We've successfully set up what we call our Bridge program in Tel Aviv a few years ago, now partnering with Turner and with Mercedes-Benz, working together. We're reaching out into parts of Africa to do work. We're reaching out to parts of Asia. So we are sourcing talent from around the world. We're not necessarily centralizing talent into the U.S. At the same time, we actively support many of the STEM initiatives that are going on in the U.S. I personally speak at high schools and try to encourage students to stay in science and technology and math and engineering. And so the company looks at it holistically, but again, it's not a U.S.-only view. It really is a global view for us. It's a global company.
And at Blackstone, fair to say, at least Blackstone Prime is centered in the U.S., so how do you...
I think that on the immigration side, I'm still hopeful that we'll actually get to something that is a reasonable compromise. Because the current situation, even pre the current administration, was not working either. There wasn't enough people who were highly qualified. Jobs you couldn't fill with U.S. workers were still left unfilled. There was no good in that. And keeping great minds in the United States building companies is in everybody's best interest. So I'm hopeful that that can still get figured out in the correct way, and at least we're talking about it now. And then in terms of STEM, there's so much going on in New York around many different organizations that we're working with in terms of retraining different parts of the population who haven't had as much of an opportunity, training kids directly early on, different types of after-school activities. I don't think anybody's really hit on it yet, the solution, but it's good to see that the laboratory seems open in terms of trying different things, but we need a lot more people. I think that it would be great to reorient some of the incentives on higher education towards the STEM a little bit more, whether it be loans or any other way to kind of encourage people to fight through some of those hard first few months or year or two of getting into an engineering discipline, because it's certainly a long slog.
Yeah.
And we either need to figure out how we can teach it in a more kind of welcoming way, or create some incentives to enable more people to fight through that initially, because I think people have the abilities. They're either too scared or they haven't been able to get over that hurdle where it becomes easier.
I guess, and I just want to frame up how serious a problem this is. Is this the kind of thing where if we don't find those answers, are you legitimately concerned about in 10 years, say, being able to have enough people to even work at Blackstone, much less, sort of the broader...
I mean, we're a pretty small company, so I like in the Blackstone Prime, but so I'm not necessarily worried about us, but I think it's hard to find great people, and the great people are truly multipliers of productivity, or exponential multipliers of productivity. So it's a big concern overall, I think, more so for like the country and for growth and for making sure that we're continuing to push the envelope than it is for our company only.
I want to shift a little bit over to actual implementation and what you actually do day to day and how you structure your work. And Alan, I want to start with you. You've before advocated for a multi-cloud approach, right? Not going for a single provider, not necessarily going for the cheapest price point, which I think clearly makes sense for Coca-Cola. Is there a version of that works for a startup that maybe can't afford a multi-cloud approach? And are there benefits to beyond just cheapest price that people need to be looking at when they look at their cloud options?
So I think when you look at the cloud providers today, I mean, what we've said is, what cloud for what? That's what we talk about within the company, is that different clouds have been constructed based on the history of the organizations, and they have certain benefits. And we've been able to look at what do we do with Amazon, where does Microsoft play in, where does Google play in, where does IBM play, where does Virtustream play? They all have specialties. The idea that we've come up with is let's take advantage of the specialties because they keep advancing those faster. They're not putting as much new technology in. It's much more stable. As a startup, look at what your organization's trying to do. Is it a high transaction volume environment? That's going to send you to one cloud. If you want something that's an IoT play, that's going to send you to another cloud. If for some reason you want to play sort of as an add-on to the ERP space, that's going to take you to a third cloud. You have to really look at what you're trying to accomplish and not just go to the easiest or the most common or most recognized name. What is right for the application you're trying to provide?
One thing, too, in terms of working with cloud companies, it's not just sort of a strictly transactional relationship a lot of the time. Is that fair to say? I mean, are there things that working with these companies that you can learn, for Coca-Cola to learn and they can learn from you? Is there sort of an exchange of ideas as you go, or is it more, this is where we need to be for this, and this is where we need to be for this? And
I think things are developing. Everybody's pushing each other a little bit, trying to get to that next generation. Each one is leapfrogging each other. Costs keep coming down, which is nice. They keep reducing costs on a regular basis. So there's a partnership, but at the same time you have to be careful because there are proprietary natures, proprietary technologies in every one of the cloud providers.
Yep.
If you make a mistake, if you go towards the proprietary technology, you're going to be no better off than you were with the ERP systems from 10, 15 years ago. You're going to be locked in. So you have to make sure you understand where you're trying to go, code for the portability, make sure that you have the ability to move. I don't see any benefits right now in moving from one cloud to the next on a daily basis or a weekly or monthly basis. Just simply the cost of making that change and the disruption it causes internally is just too great for what the benefit would be to save a little bit of money.
To add on to that, I think that the issue is, regardless of cloud specifically, or it's any of your technology, making sure that it's malleable for the future as you're designing the architecture. And too many people are interested in jumping in, taking the proprietary thing that a given cloud provider has, or just kind of, well, we'll fix it later type of an approach versus thinking through kind of what's 1, 2, 3 steps down the line that I'm going to need to react to. So tech design and the elegance of that in order to give you flexibility for the future, I think is underappreciated, and often, this rush to iterate, always just get something out there and iterate as fast as you can sometimes be really detrimental because you back yourself into a corner. As much as you say, well, we'll always have the time to go clean everything up, there's very few organizations that really stick to that, and they build up this mountain of problems.
I think what you're talking about is what we've talked about for years, is abstraction. You want to abstract everything 100%. From everything, and now what they call it the era of microservices and the ability to do this in a very easy manner, and things that you've learned from Netflix and others, now's the time to take advantage of it.
Totally agree.
And if you can do that, then you are setting yourself up for the future. Otherwise, you're just going to add to the technical debt, like you're saying.
Totally.
And in terms of setting yourself up for the future, I guess this isn't an ideal segue, but you're also trying to set yourself up for protecting yourself against added security threats, because that is sort of something I cover a lot. It's something that you guys face a lot. Alan, you have a 130-year-old recipe to protect. Bill,
which you can see in the World of Coke. Pay your $15 and you can see it in the vault. So.
But because I think we're talking about a lot of trade-offs today, right? Yep. You're talking about trade-offs and about making sure that you're not sort of committed to any one thing too closely. So what are the trade-offs that you see that you run into when you're trying to make sure that you are keeping your company safe from regular attacks, especially when you're really only one bad email link click away from everything sort of unraveling?
Well, I think people, they focus way too much on trying to figure out like the black box. Oh, well, you know, the security team's going to handle everything and I don't have to worry about it. So we've been spending a ton of time trying to educate our employee base. We've been doing monthly phishing tests and all kinds of different awareness and trying to create a human sensor network where we're much more aware of what's going on, in addition to having a hard perimeter defense and the ability to respond quickly to any type of attack and an intelligence about who would be attacking us and why. So, you know, it's a layered approach, but I think people give the human side like short shrift, because if everybody just picked a much, much harder password, like that might do more per dollar spent, certainly, than almost any security technology in order to truly protect the firm.
Well, and I guess, and Alan, you are in a little bit of a different situation, because as you said, you're broadly distributed, and then there's sort of a bunch of different companies that Coca-Cola works with. If any of those companies get susceptible to a hack, then that potentially exposes Coca-Cola as well, correct? So how do you build in third-party vulnerabilities to your threat models? And
I mean, security is everybody's responsibility. It's not just the corporate office. It's every employee. It's every contractor. It's every partner of ours. And like any other corporation, there are a set of minimum requirements that we have, that we audit against, that we make sure people adhere to. And that seems to be working, fine. Now, I think the challenge, and not so I'm speaking from Coke, but I'm also one of the founders of the Cloud Security Alliance, is sometimes corporations that we're seeing when we see at the CSA start confusing compliance with security. And compliance is something that we all worry about every single day, but security is something, especially from a CSA standpoint, and for startups, understanding what the minimum set of requirements are for corporations is probably the biggest hurdle that a startup needs to understand before they come and try to sell to us something.
Yeah, totally. We also, and we founded a company to try to take vendor risk and categorize it into ratings. It's called CyberGRX, because we didn't feel like, every one of us is getting our vendors to fill out these questionnaires, and we're doing kind of the amount of diligence we can afford to do across, we have 4,000 vendors and we're tiny, Blackstone Corporate. You probably have 40,000 or 100,000 vendors, and there's no way you can possibly do a full deep dive into each of them. So I think we're trying to create kind of an alliance where, one trusted third party can do it, and we can all benefit from it, and hopefully that'll push it, make it a little bit easier to police.
I want to, this sort of gets to, I think, to the first thing we started with, which was the idea of the partnership and the idea of people accepting IT and the value that the role that it plays, because I do think when people get an alert to update their password every 3 months, when people get phishing tests every month, those are things that can sort of, they're part of sort of a larger perceived bureaucracy, I guess. And so I think it's another point at which, how do you communicate just how bad it would be if something went wrong? How do you get people to buy in, I guess? Aside from I totally appreciate this is what we do, but how do you get people to accept that and recognize that as the cost of doing business?
I mean, I think cyber has been the easiest thing to get people to buy into. I mean, the events of the world have kind of made it much simpler than it was 5 years ago to get people to understand the risk. So I think the bigger change management issue is around utilizing new functionality and utilizing new apps and like really changing how they work. That continues to be the biggest challenge, far and away. I think that as technologists, I didn't realize I was going to spend most of my time trying to sell, it certainly it continues to be harder as the pace of innovation gets more and more. People keep putting out new great features and don't worry about how to get people to use them. So this is like a startup-focused, entrepreneurship-focused conference, and the more I can stress, like, focus on how you're going to get your user from where they are today to point B, through your rollout of your specific technology from wherever they work before, and most people don't do that. They just assume that their solution is excellent.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the fear of cybersecurity hacks in there, it's even harder.
What's interesting to me is I think the corporations' communications that are really taking off. We're seeing a lot of internal communication. There's a lot of external communication. The press and others, the media, are writing about it, which is nice. And I think that the corporations are doing things about these things, whether it's Coke or Blackstone or others. And we're seeing this again, the CSA surveys are showing this. What's interesting, though, is how many of us actually apply this in our personal lives. And I think there's fewer number of people that change their password regularly. There's fewer number of people that have more complex passwords for all of your personal lives than you do actually from the corporate. And that actually puts the corporates at risk if you're getting into a situation where you're sharing devices or sharing passwords. Somebody can easily hack your social media account, and all of a sudden they're using that information to phish and get back into the corporation. So I think we have to start taking lessons learned about how the corporations are doing protect themselves in our own personal lives as well.
As Bill, you mentioned, this is a sort of a startup-focused conference, and so Alan, I wanted to ask you a question, because you a few years ago started something called The Bridge. You mentioned it earlier, where Coca-Cola identifies startups, works with them to try to solve IT issues, if that's a fair categorization of it. And I guess my question is, for this audience especially, how can a startup make itself visible to a company like Coke or visible to a Blackstone and work in that capacity? And what is the exchange there? What is the sort of value added on both ends when that relationship happens?
I think the visibility actually isn't that hard. At the end of the day, we have very good relationships with the accelerators, incubators, the VCs, the angel investors on a global basis. And when we need something or we're looking for something, we have a pretty good screening process. The investors are always willing to screen for us. So we're using the investment community, the universities, to do our initial screening. That's how we will find things very, very quickly. The bigger challenge is, how do you scale? Just because you have a startup and you have a great idea, it doesn't mean that you can actually scale and work with any large corporation. We have things in our organizations called indemnification clauses. We have insurance requirements. We need 24/7 customer service in 200+ countries. Sometimes it's just not the right time yet for certain startups to engage in certain areas. Sometimes it's worth us taking the risk, and it gets back to what you're saying. There is a risk profile that we create. We will look at that in given situations, but in a given year, we're only going to be able to test maybe 10 different technologies or 10 different things, even as large as a company as we have today.
I mean, I think maybe we're small enough that we can maybe be the bridge from the startup to the Coca-Cola size enterprise. We try to have different rules for how we engage small companies versus big companies, knowing that they're going to get crushed under bureaucracy of certain rules that there's no possible way that they could deal with. I would say the biggest way to get noticed is to really focus on understanding the customer's pain point. Nothing is more annoying than somebody coming up to you and selling you a product that clearly you would never need in 100 years. And then the people whose product you do need don't necessarily approach it the right way. They foist upon us the making all the connection between the problem that we have and the solution that they provide. Whereas instead, if they spent more time understanding, okay, what does Blackstone do? What are the likely problems that they're going to have? And then only bringing us a solution and a pitch that's specifically targeted to some of those problems, that always gets through the door and often is welcomed with open arms. Yeah. We've partnered with, we're up to I think 15 different investments, strategic investments that we've made in vendors that came to us in that way, and we were like, wow, we saw the seeds of something that could really aid us as a corporation, and then we created a great partnership with them where we'll invest a little bit, we'll help them operate, and help them learn how to go engage Coke and other large companies. But it all came down to how they approached us at the beginning. Wow, it was it hit perfectly that they solved a key problem for us.
But what I think is, in the first 2 minutes of talking to somebody if it's a hit or a miss. And this gets down to storytelling. If they can't tell a story and you can't tell it efficiently within 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to lose us, you're going to lose the investors, you're going to lose future employees. And that's an art that I think startups have to understand and learn. Understand my company, understand how I go to market, understand how I interact with my customers, and you have 2 minutes. If you can't get that message across in 2 minutes, you know what? You've missed out, you just have to move on. So I think it's polishing that before you approach the major brands is also very, very important.
Also, continually banging your head against the wall against people who you don't have a good fit. It's not about getting that first intro and having a 15-minute meeting and then turning that into another 30. Like, it's about truly engaging with us. So sometimes it's better to move on. If if there isn't that fit, it's okay. Just go to the next. It's a big world. Go to the next opportunity.
Well, yeah, and so rather than sort of adapting yourself too much to fit someone else's need, maybe try to find something
Absolutely.
that's better for you.
You have to. I mean, a number of years ago, I was with a large company and was working with a startup. They adapted so much to fit my need, I put them out of business.
Right.
Because they wouldn't listen and they wouldn't tell me, no, this wasn't on their product roadmap. And they made about $1 million over 2 years, and they were completely out of business in year 3.
And that happens all the time with really large companies and small companies that are creating bespoke things. You need to be able to draw the line on how much we're going to customize. Prior to Blackstone, I was one of the founding team at Capital IQ, and we were invested in by 6 banks, and the fact that we had all 6 of them as investors enabled us to create the best amalgamation of all their needs instead of one big investor that would have driven us down a road that wasn't necessarily the right one for us to go as a SaaS provider.
And we just have a little bit of time left, but I think just real quick, if there's one thing you can say if it's a startup that is trying to work with you guys, what is the one thing? What is that 2 minute? What is the thing you're looking for in those 2 minutes when you're talking to them?
I'm going to go back to what Bill said. Understand my business, understand who I am and what I do. Then come in there and in your best 2 to 3 minute pitch, bring it forward. If you get a reaction and it's an invitation to join, great. If not, walk away and go to the next one because you aren't going to make any more progress.
Yeah, I think that's great. And also, the last thing that I would say is make sure, the 2 ears and 1 mouth. Spend a little bit of time listening. And even if it turns out not to be a fit for Coca-Cola, you probably can learn something from getting the feedback on why it's not a fit so that when you go to the next firm, you'll be better prepared. It's not just about your solution. It's about listening to the problems in the market.
Got it. Thank you guys so much, and thank you everybody for coming out.
Everybody still awake? All right, great, good. We've got some fun stuff to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about how YouTube is moving into the living room. We're going to talk a little bit about some new stuff that's coming. We're going to break a little news, and I think we're going to get to something that maybe some of you are wondering about, which is how YouTube has been thinking about some things happening with some of your advertisers. Neil, let's dive right in. Tell me, I think when people think of YouTube, they've traditionally thought about it as a desktop product, a mobile product, but you guys are making some strong moves to try and get to that big screen in the middle of the family room. Tell me about why you're doing that and what types of things you're getting into there.
Yeah, sure. And so first of all, thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And thank you, Matt, for being here. I think that before I even get into kind of the reasons behind our investment in the living room and kind of what we're doing there, I think it's important to kind of set the context. And I think the first thing that I would say, and hopefully all of you experience this with your own YouTube experiences, but really as it applies to content in general, I really do feel, and I say this to my teams all the time, that we really are living in the golden age of content. There is so much investment, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars going into producing fantastic content, whether it's movies, television shows, dramas, comedies, not just at YouTube, but across multiple platforms. And the choices that we all have as consumers are really profound. I mean, we've gone from a world where as recently as 30 years ago, there was really 3 or 4 choices every evening to one now where there's tens of millions of channels just on platforms like YouTube alone. We can switch from one to the other effortlessly. And more of that content just keeps on coming. For example, every hour of every day, there's 400 hours of video content uploaded to YouTube every single minute. And so we have this kind of proliferation of content, and I think what our consumers are telling us is that they'd like to be able to access it wherever they are. And so, for example, like many platforms, mobile is the place where most of our traffic is, about 60% of our traffic, continues to grow really rapidly. But for a platform like YouTube, where so much of it is really about video, the living room makes perfect sense. And in fact, our growth rates in the living room are higher than they are on any other channel, 100% year on year. And if you think about it, it makes sense. You come home after work, you're in this sort of lean back mode. And YouTube, you can turn on something like YouTube. Perhaps you're looking for something specific. Perhaps you're just looking to be entertained or informed. And it turns out that those session lengths on living room for YouTube are longer than they are on any other platform that we have out there.
What are some of the ways people are getting YouTube on their TVs? How are they doing it through set-top boxes, through televisions? Can you talk a little bit about how you're reaching those customers?
Yes, and I'm sure pretty much everybody in the audience has noticed. The YouTube app is available on most television devices that are out there. Most major manufacturers, kind of one of the sort of primary apps that's there is the YouTube app. We also are across most set-top devices, the Rokus, Apple TVs, the gaming consoles, etc. You can also cast from your phone using something like Chromecast, and so we try to make it as easy as possible for our users to be able to get to YouTube just from their television screens.
And so then you study what people are doing in the app, right? And that helps you make decisions about what other kinds of apps to launch. Is that right? Like YouTube Kids? Is that correct? Or that was a
Yeah, I guess the way I would think about it is, while we really are living in this kind of golden age of content that I described, the traditional television viewing experience, in our mind, is one that frankly doesn't keep up with all of that great content that's out there. And so if you think about your television experience in the traditional sense today, it's not on demand, it's not personalized, and it doesn't have a lot of the social components that we take for granted when we think about all the digital platforms that we use. And so when we think about our investment in the living room, we think about addressing all three of those things. And so the YouTube app, when you launch it, delivers the content that you want to watch whenever you want to watch it. It truly is video on demand. It's also personalized, because when you're logged into your YouTube app on your television screen, it carries over all of those recommendations, kind of all of that learning we have about what types of programming you like to watch, what types of videos you like to watch, and delivers you that personalized experience that you take for granted from YouTube on your mobile device or on your laptop or on your tablet. And so we bring that to your television screens. And we also make it very easy for you to connect with those content creators that you know and love on the platform. All things that we think have been missing from kind of the traditional television experience, if you will. And we've extended that recently, actually, just a few days ago, to work not just for the YouTube kind of main app experience, but also for an app that we built a couple of years ago, we've now brought to the television screen, which is called YouTube Kids. And so I think for all the parents that are out there, this is going to be really welcome news. YouTube Kids is actually one of our most popular apps. It's got over 30 billion views worldwide. It has 8 million weekly actives. It's an app that's designed for all the little people in our homes, where the corpus is protected, where parents have control over the content that their children are watching. And one of the things that we noticed in the living room is that one of the verticals that was the most popular were kids content and cartoons. Generally content that families like to watch together. Makes sense. You have a big screen, you know, parents are sitting there with their children. And so just a few days ago we announced YouTube Kids will be a second app in addition to the YouTube main app that will be available on living room screens. It'll be available in all 26 countries where YouTube Kids is available across LG, Samsung, and Sony smart TVs to start, but they'll come to the same set of devices that you enjoy YouTube TV, the main app on today.
Can you talk a little bit about what kinds of stuff is in YouTube Kids? Like what are the, you mentioned cartoons, but what else is there? Are there learning experiences in there?
Yeah, there's, you know, a very large portion of the corpus for YouTube Kids is educational content. Obviously educational content done in a fun way. There's a lot of, we have a lot of endemic YouTube creators that produce content purpose-built for children. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she has her favorite set of creators that she follows, you know, some of them are entertainment, lots of them have sort of educational value to them as well. And then we also work with lots and lots of, you know, kind of traditional content creators who've been producing content for a very long time, like Sesame Street, etc., to put that content on YouTube Kids as well.
Something you and I were talking about backstage is getting rid of your cable connection. I think that there are quite a few people, myself included, who feel like we're really on the cusp of being able to do that in a real way, where you can still get live sports, you can still get 24-hour news, and a big reason that it seems like we're on the cusp of being able to do that is now things like YouTube TV. Can you tell folks what YouTube TV is and what you've been seeing since you launched it?
How many folks have heard of YouTube TV in the audience? Show of hands. A fair amount. So for those of you that haven't, it's actually a new product from YouTube that we launched a few weeks ago. And the idea there, and it's consistent with this theme of, you know, YouTube in the living room. The idea there is that we combine the best of kind of traditional broadcast and cable television with the best of YouTube. And it's an experience where we've partnered with our content partners, all the major broadcast channels, many of the major cable channels, and for $35 a month, you have a complete subscription to content, all the shows that you know and love, all the content and programming that you know and love from traditional television, alongside all of what you watch on YouTube on a regular basis. And so, for example, if the one thing that you sensed was missing from the YouTube platform over the years was something, as you mentioned, like live sports, well, now you get that through all the partnerships that we have with the major broadcasters, the cable channels, like the ESPNs, etc. of the world. If there was a particular drama that you enjoyed on television and you were able to kind of get highlights of it on YouTube, well, now you can get the full show alongside all of those kind of clips and secondary content that you were already finding on YouTube. And again, it goes back to this notion of we think there's great content out there, but we wanted to build a television experience that was truly built for this century, oriented towards kind of our core millennial audience. And so we've done things in YouTube TV that have never been done before. So for $35 a month, you get a DVR that's not limited by the space that you have on your set-top in your home because the DVR is in the cloud. For that same price, you get access to all the Google machine learning-driven personalization and search recommendations. So you can come home and you can say something as simple as turn on the Warriors game, and it'll just do that. You don't need to remember the channel, the time, etc. If it's not quite on, it'll put it on your DVR. And you can do this across 6 different accounts in the household so that each user in the household can get their own personalized experience alongside their roommates or siblings or parents, etc. And so and the final piece that I'll mention, because I think it's important to everybody in terms of how we live our lives today, is it works seamlessly from device to device. And so, we did a study, and we found that 90% of users complete a task on a different device than they started the task on, whether it's watching a video, browsing a piece of content, making a travel reservation, what have you. And, YouTube's no different. And so we wanted YouTube TV to work seamlessly across all devices so that, you might be watching the game on your mobile phone. It should seamlessly switch to your television when that's the appropriate time, to your laptop when it is, to your tablet, etc. And so we wanted to create this kind of reimagined experience in terms of how television should really work with today's great content, and that's what YouTube TV is.
One thing I wanted to ask you to clarify, so when you talk about getting sports on YouTube TV, is this just national games like on ESPN, or can I watch my local teams as well?
Yeah, so this is I happen to be a sports nut myself, so this was an important thing for me as well. One of the things that distinguishes YouTube TV from, perhaps other services that are out there is that not only do you get the national games, you also get your local favorite teams. And so as part of our content arrangements, we have arrangements with all the regional sports networks. So, for example, you and I are from the Bay Area, so we'd be able to get all the Giants games and the Warriors games that are being carried locally alongside all the sports that you would find via the national broadcasts like NFL games, etc.
And I can watch that on my computer when I'm pretending to be working as well? Or?
You can do that all day long.
Okay, good to know. What type of adoption are you seeing on that? Are people starting to pick that up? And does that $35 price tag stick, or is that like an introductory rate and then it goes up to the same way that my cable price does after 6 months or a year?
So $35 is the price that we plan to be working with. It's really, this product is really hot, brand new, off the shelf. I mean, we're talking about having rolled it out, I believe, less than a month ago. So it's really in the market for a few weeks. The initial response has been, fantastic. The reviews of the product have been really great. And what's most important for me is that the consumer feedback, the feedback from all of our users has been really, really positive, not just in terms of the great content that's available there, but a lot of it around this kind of unique user experience that I described.
Switching gears a little bit, I assume that there's a pretty good business reason for you guys to be wanting to get in the living room, as well as just like it's a nice thing to do for people to be able to see content on their big screen. There's been, talk for several years about ad dollars moving from TV to digital. Are you starting to really see that now? Is that happening in a profound way?
Yeah, and I've been, obviously involved with YouTube for a long time. Even longer than that, I've been involved with in the advertising industry over the last couple of decades. And I've certainly seen that shift. And in my mind, it happens for a few simple reasons. If you're a brand or an advertiser, you want to go where your audience is. And as was mentioned earlier, we just recently announced the fact that on YouTube, there's 1 billion hours of video consumed every single day. That's a very meaningful chunk of the entire video consumption that happens across the planet every single day. Over 1 billion users come to our platform every single month. And so if you're a brand, that's where your audience is. And especially if you care about that younger, more millennial audience, the numbers skew even more extreme when you think about that audience. We did a recent survey where we asked that audience to identify who their top influences were, and 8 of the 10 on that top 10 list were endemic YouTube stars only 2 of them were traditional sort of musicians / Hollywood stars. And so from a brand perspective, of course, it makes sense to put your dollars there. One of the things that we have also tried to do is make sure that when we think about advertising on the platform, we're doing it with a consumer-first or user-first mentality. As I said, we live in a world where it's very easy to switch from one channel to the other if there's something uninteresting or annoying about that channel, and we want to make sure that the advertising is something where consumers have a choice as well. And that's why we introduced, several years ago, and I think we were, one of the first in the industry, a skippable ad format. It's called TrueView. And really, simply, if the consumers are not interested in that advertising message, they can skip it. And the advertiser doesn't have to pay when that happens. But more importantly, the user can just move on to their content. I think everybody's experienced the TrueView format. In the mobile world, we're also introducing kind of less intrusive formats. For example, a few months ago, we released a bumper ad format. So instead of the traditional 30-second TV commercial that we live through every single day, this is a 6-second format, which allows brands to get their message across, but also allows consumers to kind of get on with their content consumption experience, especially in a world where they might be snacking, watching a few minutes of video content here or there throughout the course of the day. And I think it's really for that reason of kind of the fact that the audience is there and the fact that the ad formats allow them to connect even more closely with their consumers that advertisers have continue to increase their spend on our platform. We have this program that those of you in the media industry may be familiar with called Google Preferred. It's our means to attract or make it simple for television to advertise, television dollars to flow to YouTube. It's an upfront that we run every year. In fact, it's going to happen later this week in New York.
You're flying there tomorrow, right?
I'm flying there today to be a part of it. And it's something that's grown every year. In fact, this year over last year, Google Preferred's grown 65%. The number of advertisers, U.S. brands, that we have participating in the program has doubled year on year. And so television advertisers have kind of voted with their pocketbooks in terms of where their spend is. And again, I think it's fundamentally because they find this really engaged audience of 1 billion plus users on the platform.
But you've also had a big backlash from advertisers this year. In basically, they've been uncomfortable with their ads being placed against certain videos. Anybody can make a video and upload it to YouTube, and sometimes that can be stuff that's untrue, hateful. What are you trying to do to make advertisers more comfortable to stay there and to be there?
Yeah, so in the last few weeks, we've definitely gotten feedback from a lot of our brands as we continue to grow that they really want to make sure that their advertising is showing up in places on YouTube, on videos on YouTube that are suitable for their brands. And we've heard that feedback. We've worked incredibly hard over the course of the last month in terms of identifying videos that may not be suitable for advertisers' brands. We've tightened up our policies, but more importantly, tightened up enforcement of those policies. And as a result, we've now identified 5 times as many more videos as we were before that we've eliminated from the rotation where advertisers' ads may have run. We've also introduced new controls for advertisers so that they can pinpoint their advertising more precisely on the YouTube platform. But I think one thing that's very important to remember, and it really goes back to the founding of YouTube 12 years ago, is what makes the platform great is it is a place where any one of us can express themselves freely. No matter how controversial of a message we have, no matter how much cutting-edge content we have or how much we're pushing the boundaries. And I just want to be clear that we have no plans to change that sort of fundamental ethos about YouTube, because while we need to, a lot of that content, of course, is funded by our fantastic advertisers and our partnerships with them, and that's why we've been so feverishly working to address their needs. We also want to make sure that there's a balance in terms of what we can do to foster that type of creative expression, free speech on our platform. So, for example, for creators, in addition to them being able to generate money through advertisers, if you post a piece of content to YouTube, you can make money through other channels, such as, Super Chat, which is a new feature that allows fans to pay creators directly. We have a new product called FameBit, which allows brands and creators to connect directly and kind of make sponsored messages. and we're exploring other means by which creators can build their livelihoods on the YouTube platform and express themselves freely.
Neil, we're running out of time here, and I want to make sure we get to this. You have something brand new to talk about today, right?
Yeah, so we're very excited. I spent a lot of time talking about the user's experience in the living room, and a lot of focus, as I said, on this sort of golden age of content concept. So we actually we're in the midst of rolling out a completely revamped design of our desktop application. You can get a quick look of it here. We're going to roll this out in stages. It's experimental in nature. It's a very early beta. But for those of you that are interested, we're going to have a limited opportunity for you to go and experience it. It's at youtube.com/new. And the design principle is very basic. It's very simple, which is we really want the technology and everything surrounding the content to simply fade out of the way when you're connecting with creators and the content that you know and love on the YouTube platform. And so that means a few things. For example, a lot of what might have been distracting text and things like that in the current YouTube experience kind of fades away when you're consuming content. It has a much lighter kind of ephemeral feel to it. The other aspect is that we want to be consistent across all of our YouTube experiences, from desktop to tablet to your experience on iOS or Android, and even in the living room. And this new redesign sets us up for that. It's actually built on a technology called Polymer, which will allow for very fast iteration and innovation. And so while this is just the beginning, over the course of the next few weeks and months, look for kind of new pieces of innovation that we'll be bringing to all of our users. And one of them to start with is what you can kind of see here in the dark background, which is something that's called dark mode. And the idea here is to give a very dark palette to the content that you're consuming, so that you can actually your eyes are trained on the true colors of the content and the video that you're consuming, and everything else really fades out of the way. That's something that when you're opted into this new redesign, you can choose by going into the settings area and turning on the toggle. So we're really excited about this. This is something that we're announcing today. You're the first, this audience really is the first to hear about this, and you can go immediately to youtube.com/new and experience it for yourself. You'll be able to switch back to the old experiences easily if you choose to do so. But the reason I'm excited is that I think it's the beginning of a journey, and you'll see a lot more innovation from us here because of this new technology, not just on the desktop, but also across our other applications on iOS, Android, the living room, etc.
And Neil, thank you so much for coming out today, and thank you all too.
Thank you very much.
How do you take an Internet 1.0 giant who most thought had seen its best days and turn it into a thriving publisher? Having kicked off that transformation 1 year ago here at Collision, About.com is back to tell an evolution story and announce the last step of the process. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Neil Vogel.
Hi, everyone. So this is a story we're going to tell that is, we had a true legacy brand, and what we had to do to turn it into a vibrant and growing business. And we think it's a remarkable story. It's definitely an unlikely story, and it's also definitely a personally exhausting story. But it's fun to talk about. So here we go. I think the slides were, there we go. So we're old. Like, you guys, most of you were in like high school when we started this thing, if that. We're like millennial old. We're one of the largest publishers online. We've made expert content that helps people for a very, very long time. In 2012, IAC, which is Barry Diller, and a lot of brands that you guys would know, from Expedia to TripAdvisor to Match to now About.com, bought About from the New York Times. And this is the good news. When they bought it, we were a top 20 website with 100 million users and 100 million in revenue, which sounds great and is very exciting. The problem is users and revenue were half of what they were at their peak. So clearly something was going on here, and rather than explain to you the details of what was going on, I'll just show you this, which is what About.com looked like in, this is like late 2013, around the time when I joined. And so we've been around for 16, 17, 18 years at this point, and the site looks like this. So the question you have to ask is like, why do we even still exist? Like, why does this business still exist on the internet? And the answer is, we were always very good at making content people cared about. So we made great evergreen content, content that mattered, like how to make something, how to cook something, how to fix something, how to diagnose something, how to invest something. And we really helped people, and that mattered. So because of that, we still would get traffic from Google and Facebook and other places, when otherwise we probably shouldn't, because we were apparently doing our best to make our site completely unusable for any normal human beings. So this is what we did. We were there for a year. We had a business that no one had touched the code or the design since like 2006. So we launched a brand new About.com, built it from scratch, rewrote every line of code, redesigned it from scratch, put it out into the world, and it looked like this, which is pretty good. Like, we're kind of proud of this. So here's what happened. It stopped the decline. Users started coming back. We're actually able to sell some ads. You're able to go to a cocktail party and say you work at About.com and be excited about that. Like, that's really fun now. So then this is what happened, which is nothing. And we had a lot of momentum. We thought we were really smart. The guys at IAC, like Barry Diller and my boss, who's the CEO, were super psyched with us. But then we just stalled. And for a year, we could not get it to grow. We could not get advertisers to care. We just couldn't make anything happen. So here's what we realized. We were doing it wrong. And what we were doing was the wrong thing better. And let me explain what that means. It means that our model, the About.com model, the general information portal-y website model, was from the 90s, where scaled brands equal trust. And for those of you who are old enough like me to know what the old internet used to look like, if you had a big brand, that was enough, because the internet was the Wild West. And names like this were the names that dominated: AOL, MSN, Yahoo, About.com. And we had a thriving business. But then the world changed. And today, vertical brands equal trust. Meaning, think of them all. Nobody goes to the department store anymore. The same thing's happening online. So the brands people trust now are like these brands. Like, if you want to cook dinner, you don't want to go to About Food. You want to go to Tasty. If you want to travel, you want to go to TripAdvisor, not About Travel. So we had a problem. And what we learned was, we can't be everything to everyone. You just can't. And this is sort of the clincher. Nobody wants diabetes advice from the place where they learn to stay on their floors. And if you really internalize that, like, we've been here for 2.5 years, and we're like, oh, man, we did all this work, and it's not working, and we're tired, and now we have to, like, figure out some kind of pivot to do to make this whole thing work. And here's what we learned ultimately, and it's a tribute to IAC, our parent company, a tribute to our team, is that our problems were not going to fix themselves. We had to do something. And if we didn't do something, our best outcome was sideways forever, and that was not appealing to any of us. So we're going to flip the script. We're going to build standalone vertical brands. Like, why can't we do that? We think we can do that, and here's why. We have 20 years of content. We've been in this game a very long time, making very good content written by experts. Our secret weapon is 20 years of data. The first thing we did was built a data science team that has 7 people on it. 5 of them are PhDs, to figure out exactly what content we have and what people want and what works. And third, we're still huge. We're still like a top 20 site after all of this. And if you put those 3 things together, we have a real opportunity. And then let's look at our content. And this is the other thing, the other sort of happy accident of our plan was 80% of our content clustered around things that actually matter on the internet. Health, finance, tech, home, travel. Things that it matters where you read it. Like, nobody cares where they see a Kardashian picture. They just don't. You very likely don't care where you see like a summary of last night's Red Sox game. It's just in too many places, it doesn't matter. But if you hurt your knee playing tennis, or you need to figure out what to do with your IRA, where you get that advice really, really matters. So we were going to stick to content that really mattered in building our brands and throw away the rest, which meant that 20%, 15, 20% of our content, we're going to throw in the garbage, which is another interesting decision to make to tell your bosses who spent $300 million buying a business you're going to do. And then here's the bet we made. We bet we could turn Yahoo into Condé Nast, or Yahoo into Vox, or you name it. We bet that we could turn a general portal thing into a real branded publisher and make it work. And here's what we thought. 25% chance we're really wrong. And if we're really wrong, we're probably going to crater the company, because once you start breaking this thing up, there's no putting it back together. We had like a serious Humpty Dumpty problem. The second thing is, but we were so convinced that we were right when we looked at the landscape that we're like handicapped at 75%, and that's what we hung our hat on. We think we have a great chance to make this thing work. And then it was burn the boats, which means once we start doing this, we're burning the boats. There's no going back. You can't partially break up, a top 20 internet site in 2017. So next move was this. This was like the Rocky training montage where we got to work. And we spent 9 months going through every single piece of content on About.com. We threw about half of it in the garbage. We have a 60-person team doing nothing but reviewing old content to get us ready for this. And we're getting ready to launch brands. So it's been exactly 1 year since we launched our first brand, which we happen to do here at Collision. What's happened? And I think this is sort of like the payoff moment that we're so proud of, which is Verywell was the first brand we launched in April of last year. It is our health brand. It's like a WebMD everyday health competitor, except it's the opposite of that. We told our guys to figure out what our content advantage is, which is our content is written by humans and experts who have empathy. So we want a health site that when you have a headache and you go there, you don't think you're going to die of a brain tumor. You think we're going to figure out how to get your headache better. So we built a beautiful health site at scale, and it looks like this. We took all the health content off About.com, 50,000 pieces of content, and now I think we're the 4th or 5th biggest health site on ComScore. And this is what happened. When we launched in April on ComScore, we had 12 million uniques. The last month they reported we had 17 million. We grew 42% in a year in the most competitive content category on the internet where no one else in the category grew at all. And then we're like, oh, we're onto something here. This could work. So next we launched The Balance, a personal finance site based on all of About.com's personal finance content. Not stock picks, more like how to save for college. And we're like, oh, this is kind of working. Same thing that Verywell did. We're going to demystify something complicated, make it nice and easy, and make it work. Here's what's happened. We launched in September with 6.5 million ComScore uniques. Last month, we had 13 million. We doubled the size of this business. This is also a top 10 ComScore site in its category. Then we launched LifeWire, which is our how to wipe a hard drive, how to fix my broken router site. We launched it in November with 3.5 million uniques, and we now have 6.5 million uniques. And this thing is up almost 100%. Then we launched The Spruce, which is at launch the 3rd or 4th biggest home site on the internet. Remember, we had scale, and it looks like this. It's beautiful. It combines how to do something with inspiration that makes you want to do it. It's very unique in this space, using sort of like our old About.com how-to chops. We launched in February with 8.5 million uniques. Internally, we're up 40%. We don't register full months in ComScore yet. And we've got one more to go, which is TripSavvy, which when we launch it will be the largest non-UGC travel site on the internet that we're incredibly excited about. So what we had was something that 13 months ago, arguably nobody cared about. Nobody was interested in About.com. Users kind of were if you got there. Advertisers kind of were because we had scale and data. Now we're the fastest growing large publisher online, and I don't know who's even close. Each brand is the fastest growing in its category, and this is not like fake math. It's not like we started with 1 and went to 2. We started with 12 million and went to 17 million. And right now we're announcing the last step in our evolution, which we thought was a nice bookend to what we did at Collision last year, which was announced at the beginning of the evolution, which is we're announcing the new name of About.com today, and we're doing it right here. And it's because About.com means things to people, like people in this room and people in our industry, that it's not anymore. It means general interest website. It means something that everyone's heard of, but nobody knows what it is. So we have a chance to, now that we're not About.com, and once we launch TripSavvy, we will have no content on About.com, to redefine what we are and what we can be going forward. So here's our new name. This is the big reveal. Nobody likes Drake? Come on. Anyway. And the new name is .dash. And I think, like everything else we did, we tried to be thoughtful about it. We didn't just want to like pick a random name that's made up, like some other people have done recently. So here's what .dash is. .dash is taking the dot in about.com. A red ball or a red dot has always been part of the about.com logo for 20 years. We thought that was cool to keep. A dash obviously means like action or moving forwards or punctuation for what comes next. And what we thought was super cool, a little Easter egg baked in, is for those of you who know anything about Morse code, .dash in Morse code is the letter A. So we sort of like hard-baked the old letter A from about.com and a little Easter egg in our new naming. So that's what the new identity is going to look like as of right now. And I'll tell a little story to close. When we started this project a year and a half ago, probably a year and 3/4 ago when we really started to sell the idea internally, there weren't a lot of people that believed we could do this. I thought we could do it. I thought, sort of. There was a lot of doubts. I think a lot of people that worked for us wanted to do it, but weren't sure it was going to work. I'm sure that our parent company at IAC was very optimistic because they gave us the capital and the leeway to do it, but they were nervous too. So what we did is in our office, we hung up a sign that said, Condé Nast, Vox, Meredith, Vice, Hearst, BuzzFeed, blank. And we said, when we are done, we're going to fill in that blank. We're going to fill in that blank with something that is as meaningful as them. And now if you look at all of them, we're in the same class of size, we're growing faster, I would argue our verticals are more appealing, and we have a brand new site. We have 20 years of data, 20 years of history, and 0 legacy issues because we built something brand new. So the name .dash for us is the culmination of this, and we can fill in our little sign. And we're now incredibly excited for the future. We're incredibly well positioned. Publishing is a tough business, but we're making it work, and we're making it work in a totally new way. And that's our story. Thanks.
I'm going to need that. No technical difficulties there. That's all me. Well, Facebook Messenger's head of product, Stan Chudnovsky, explores how bots have influenced and driven the platform's growth. Please join me in welcoming to the stage, in conversation with Kurt Wagner from Recode, Stan Chudnovsky.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you.
You too. So my name's Kurt Wagner. I write for Recode. You all know Stan, who's leading product over at Messenger. You guys have 1.2 billion users now, which makes you what? Like one of the biggest consumer products in the entire world.
I would agree.
You would agree. There's a million things I want to talk to you about, but I want to start with Asia. You were just in Asia. I always kind of think of where you guys are going with Messenger as being a WeChat model. So for those who aren't super familiar with WeChat in China, it's kind of a messaging app that does everything else besides messaging, right? You can pay your bills, you can book your airlines, you can do all that kind of stuff. Am I thinking of Messenger in the right way here? How are you guys thinking of it?
Well, we think definitely the internet in Asia sort of developed differently compared to how it developed here, for a gazillion different reasons, and reasons here are also different. But what Asian experiences prove is that there is a way where messaging apps are sort of encapsulating a lot of functionality inside, and people are using that for way more than just talking to their friends. And definitely that's something for us to learn and experience, because even our own apps are being used differently in Asia. And so that's what our Asian trip was about. We went there to sort of see how people in Asia are using our own app, and believe it or not, it's different compared to what's happening here already.
What's different about it?
People are using it way more to talk to businesses. And there is way more conversations between people and businesses that exist in Facebook ecosystem that are happening and facilitated on Messenger, happening in Asia, that's happening here. But that kind of gives us window into the future as well, and it definitely helps us to solidify our strategy in terms of how we are thinking about what we are doing here.
So I've thought a lot about that over the last couple of years. Is how do you change the mindset of a Western audience, I guess, for Messenger? Because you obviously have a lot of users in the US. I don't think of using Messenger to book my travel necessarily. So how do you actually get people to think in that way outside of Asia, where that has kind of been a predominant use case before?
That's a good question. And a lot of things that we actually did at F8 was to facilitate that very connection between people and businesses. Because the way we think about it is that we have two main ingredients in place. We have 1.2 billion people who are talking to each other. We also have 60 million businesses in Facebook ecosystem that are there on Messenger as well. And 20 million of them are active on Messenger. They're replying, they're talking to their customers. It's just what we need to do now is that we need to make it obvious that you can make that connection between people and businesses. And there are different ways of doing that. The good news is that we do believe that people, even in the Western world, are thinking about it in a similar way, in a sense that if you think about it, for the last 150 years, there were two books delivered to your doorstep. One was White Pages, which is people's directory, and another one was Yellow Pages, which is businesses directory. And Messenger is already people directory. What we need to do, we need to add business directory to it. And when we introduced Discovery tab at F8, it's our first attempt to go there. This is the place where businesses live. And obviously, ads will play an important role in bringing people and businesses together, because if businesses can advertise their services to people in the right time, in the right place, this is also happens to be our main business. That's how we're going to start making those connections. And slowly but surely, it's going to happen. I mean, believe it or not, in Australia, for example, I met a person, we did a lot of conversations and a lot of use groups. Like, you meet people who like buy their solar panels through Messenger. They saw an ad, they start a conversation, they message that business replies back, and all of a sudden, boom, it ends up in transaction like that, which is a massive transaction.
And they're actually paying through Messenger too, right?
They can. And facilitating that in the messaging environment is something what we think is going to be the future here as well.
So you mentioned ads, and I want to get back to that. That's going to be your business model. Facebook is obviously a massive advertising business, so it makes sense. But before we move off of this, you have the people, you have the businesses. You mentioned the solar panel thing. That's great. I don't think about buying my solar panels on Messenger. Would you consider like paying? I know you said that people could advertise. They would pay you to get their message in front of me if you're a business. Would you consider paying businesses and saying, hey, we want you to use this product? Like Facebook has done this with video, for example. They've gone out and they'll pay video producers to say, make more video for us so that we build this use case and this familiarity. Would you guys ever do something like that to try and jumpstart this?
I would never say never, but we haven't had conversations about it now.
People are willing to pay you for it.
It's not what's on my mind. No.
It's not what's on your mind. Okay, so let's talk about business advertising. I thought that there was going to be a payments portion to your revenue. I know that you can facilitate a payment, but I thought if I'm buying my solar panels from someone, you'd want to take a small slice of that transaction as a charge for saying, hey, we brought you together. You guys don't want to do that. Why not?
Yeah, we definitely don't want to do that, and we've been very clear about it for a few years now. Is that we don't want to be in payments business, and we want to facilitate the transactions, and we want to be friends with everybody. Payments business is deep and complex business, which we have a lot of partners who are specializing in, and we need to focus on something that we do the best, and from the money-making standpoint, that happens to be ads, and there is no point of trying to go into payments. So that's why we're going to continue to try to make money on ads, and when it comes down to payments, we want to partner with everybody, and we want to make it easy. Payments is a system with a lot of constituencies, and we are way better off partnering with everyone and making it easy for people to pay rather than trying to get ourselves into those transactions and get our own cut of it.
So the ads that you're testing now, at least the ones that I know of, are like inbox ads, right? So I would open my Messenger inbox and there would be a message from you and a message from friends, and then I'd see like an ad kind of among those.
That's one of the things we're testing in Asia. Another one is that when you're actually buying ads in newsfeed, but the call to action is send a message. And so you are seeing an ad from a business, you tap on that ad, it opens up a thread in Messenger, and you can start talking to that business.
Right,
so
okay.
That's another
A few different options.
Yeah.
I think of messaging as being a pretty personal and intimate space, right? My private conversations are usually private for a reason. Advertising isn't always conducive to privacy. So how are you guys thinking about, surfacing something in my inbox there that I feel comfortable receiving there and doesn't freak me out as a user?
Well, all the spaces are sort of private spaces. Facebook newsfeed is a private space. Instagram feed is a private space. The inbox space is also private space. So if we would be starting to insert ads inside threads, that would be sort of going probably into the areas that might potentially freak you out. Might not freak out somebody else, but when it's in inbox and when you just see the ads that is relevant to you, for a lot of people it's just going to be additional content, and that's what we are experiencing right now in the tests that we are running. Because another thing is that what it leads to opening up a thread, and then you can actually talk to that business. So it leads to the same paradigm that you already used to. You're talking to businesses, you're talking to people, you can ask questions, and it's all initiated by you. If you don't initiate that interaction, then nothing happens. And so as long as we continue to adhere to those principles, it feels like we're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I've asked you this before, so I know the answer, but for those who are interested, you're not using my private conversations to target me, right? Like you're not saying, I saw you mentioned you were going to be in New Orleans to Stan, we're going to send you ads about being in New Orleans.
We are definitely not doing that.
Okay, that'd be a really great way to target. It'd probably freak me out.
We don't do that.
Okay, don't do that. You mentioned kind of this ad being another form of content, but then you also mentioned customer service scenarios, right? I'm now interacting with a business perhaps about a purchase or buying my solar panels, whatever. Do you think that most of the use cases for you to make money are customer service based, or could I receive a great 10-minute video from HBO in my Messenger inbox? Like, is there entertainment elements to an ad, or is it mostly utility for you?
So we actually don't even think about customer service necessarily as a way to make money at all. We think about customer service as a way to facilitate conversation between people and businesses that might eventually lead to transaction or might not, but it does build that habit of you having conversation with businesses on Messenger, to your original point of how do you bridge the gap. In terms of entertainment and other stuff, totally, if HBO finds value in having thread with people, and if people find value in receiving certain clips through HBO, we can totally see that working, and that's available today. A lot of people are following different news organizations. There are a bunch of like TechCrunch has a pretty good bot, for example. You guys should too.
We should.
And people are getting their news there. there is no reason why they shouldn't be getting their videos there as well.
Right.
So yes, definitely these are the use cases that we want developers to enable. But we don't want to dictate what people do on our platform. It's an open platform, so we just hope that people will figure out the right way to address the needs of their users, and that's what we are building it for.
So you mentioned bots. I believe it was a year ago you kind of opened up the bot platform. At the time, that was like a really big deal, and I think a lot of people maybe jumped the gun in terms of what they expected from the bot. They were like, oh, great, now I'll be able to talk to a human-level AI that's going to handle all of my needs and wants. That's obviously not...
And that led to disappointment.
That led to a little bit of disappointment. Where do you think bots are now for you guys? Obviously, there's a large number of them. Do people continually actually use the bot? I will say, and I've told you this, I'm skeptical of the bot thing. A lot of them don't seem to fill my needs. What are you guys finding now that it's been about a year that you've been doing this?
Yeah, so the way we are thinking about it, that's a good question, right? And we've tried to be careful in terms of how we would be talking about bots, but everyone, as you said, expected a human-like conversation, which was hard for developers to do. And expectations were high, and that led to some people's disappointments. The truth is that the way we've been thinking about bots, it never was the end. It was always a mean to an end. Again, the plan was always to connect people and businesses.
Okay.
And in many cases, there is no bot needed. You can just talk to a human being, and that will be good enough. Like example, that guy who bought a solar panel, he never talked to a bot. He talked to a human being.
Sure.
But then that business can start building bots to make these conversations more effective for that business. That business can automate a bunch of tasks. For example, if people are asking, what time do you open, there is no reason for a human being to answer that. That can be easily automated.
Right.
And so bots are there to make those conversations more efficient for people and for businesses. And as such, they're just a tool. They're not necessarily an end. And so when you start thinking about them this way, there is no disappointment necessarily. It's just an API that is there to enable easier conversation when you want to do that as a developer or as business. And so from that standpoint, it's a completely different story, and that's what seems to be working right now.
So you guys have a kind of an AI assistant called M. I always thought that the bots were almost like a stepping stone to M being a little bit more universal, right? Almost like this one bot to rule them all type of thing. If I have M, I can say, hey, what time does it open? And I don't need to download the bot for whatever restaurant I'm talking about because M can go out and find that for me. Am I thinking of that in the right way? Like, how do you guys think of this M AI assistant working either alongside or in conjunction with the bot program that you have?
So M is becoming a platform that developers are also starting to build on. And one of the things we announced is Delivery.com, for example, was the first third-party developer who built on top of M platform. And the plan with M was that we can't yet do everything perfectly for everybody, so we're going to do everything for a small group of people, and it's human-powered AI, and that's how we released M. And then as soon as we learned about certain verticals that we can fully automate, we decided to start releasing them one by one. But we have a platform, and that platform, which is M, starts to make suggestions to people based on what it can do when it knows that it can do it. And from that standpoint, yes, once M is enabled to everybody, you will be able to ask M for when certain restaurant is open, or you can go and talk to that particular restaurant. These are just different modes of interacting with restaurants.
Different ways to get to the same.
Different ways to get to the same. And some people will do one, some people will do another one, and we just don't want to dictate people what they should be doing. We just want to give them ability to get to the answers the way they would prefer to.
So we talked about not using our conversations to target people with ads. That's creepy. But M kind of listens in on your conversations in the sense that it could recommend an Uber based on me saying I need to get from point A to point B. it's kind of running in the background, realizes I'm trying to move somewhere, and will then come out and recommend, right? So that's not an ad, but it's still a targeted suggestion, if you will. So
you can opt out of that if you want.
Okay, so if I don't like it, I can opt out.
Yeah.
But how do you? In some cases, it's helpful, right? Like maybe I don't want to opt out all the way.
The way we think about it is that clearly we need to provide value to people, so they actually want to use that.
Right.
And if we don't provide value to people, then whatever. We are doing it in order to provide that value, which is make the right suggestion at the right time. And that's what it comes down to. Do you provide value or not? Do you have utility or you don't have utility?
Right.
And the usage of data is a derivative of that. If we don't provide enough utilities, then we don't have
Right. If it's useful, I'll let it read my messages, and if it's not, I'm going to say no. Have you found a use case where you realize, oh, people are not ready for this use case yet? The Uber thing, like I said, that's helpful. If I'm actually talking, someone recommends an Uber, maybe I'd say that's enough utility for me to be okay with the fact that Messenger's kind of creeping in the background here. Is there a use case you found where it's like, oh, people really don't like that? Like that crossed the line, it freaked them out?
We found out that a lot of people are just starting to use encrypted messages for things that they don't want to in any way expose. So we have those secret conversations, which is end-to-end signal level encryption, probably one of the best in the industry. And people start that whenever, like, my wife needs my social security number. I'm gonna use that.
Send it over Messenger.
Of course.
Wow. All right.
Well,
no, that's great.
It's end-to-end encrypted. It's
put it to the test.
Device to device. Yeah, definitely.
All right. We only have like 2 minutes, but I want to ask you about M. Right now, it's text. Right? Like M is all about I text and say, hey, I need help with this, and it replies. Amazon is doing voice with Alexa. Apple's doing voice with Siri. Why are you guys doing text versus voice, and is there a day when I'm going to be speaking out loud to M versus texting with M?
So there are obviously a lot of people and companies doing a lot of interesting things in the space, and that's awesome. The way we think about it is that it's sort of like three-step funnel, really. So if you are starting with voice, at first you need to recognize what you're talking to, and then you're obliged to do something about it. Second, you need to, once you figure out what you're talking to, you need to translate it into text, and then you need to NLP it, you need to understand what the text is about, and then you need to fulfill that request. So there is three steps in that funnel. And let's say you're really good at every step. Let's say you are getting step 1 with 90% probability, and step 2 with 90% probability, and step 3 with 90% probability. You are still in the world of multiplying probabilities, which means that the outcome of that exercise is actually lower than you would like that to be. So what we decided to do is that focus on that second and third step in the funnel and nail them, which also gives us ability not to react when we don't know what's going on. If you don't have to act on voice every single time, when M cannot make a suggestion, it doesn't make any suggestions, because like it doesn't know what's going on, but it teaches itself, and so forth, so on. So once we nail those things, then we can go into voice. But until we nail them, we don't want to go into the world where we teach people what we cannot do well. We want to do whatever we do very, very well and build up. Otherwise, we're going to be in the world where people very quickly realize certain things that we don't do well yet, and then they might not give us another try. That's why we're focusing on the bottom of the funnel right now.
Voice eventually?
Voice eventually.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I hope everybody's been enjoying New Orleans so far this week, and you're going to have a lot of great night summits and events, and we hope to see you all at many of those. Our next speaker I know has a zest for life in addition to thinking big, so I look forward to seeing him at some of those night summit events. Can an interplanetary view of Earth give us a perspective on solving the most pressing global issues of our time? To discuss the far-reaching impact of moonshot projects In conversation with Lauren Grush, please welcome to the stage Naveen Jain.
Hello, everyone. Also, Randy Glein was here with us today from DFJ, an early investor in SpaceX. So the title of our talk is just perfect for our panel because it's called Moonshots, and we're going to be talking about, disruptive ideas, but also the two of you have your sights set on the moon in different ways. So Naveen, can you give us a little overview about your company, Moon Express, and what you guys are doing with that?
Absolutely. Hello, Collision. So we are here to talk about moonshots, and when I say moonshots, it is a literal moonshot. We are going to the moon, baby. So what is it that we are really trying to do? We want to inspire everyone to believe there is nothing that is impossible if a small group of people that is at Moon Express, 35 people, can dream and land on the moon. Not only we become the first company to ever achieve that goal, we become the fourth superpower. So when you come and start thinking about the entrepreneurs becoming the superpower, this is just the beginning to show what is possible. And my hope is by the time we are done with this session, every one of you is asking yourself, what is my moonshot? What would I do that's going to fundamentally change the trajectory of how humanity lives? Because you and I and the people in this room are capable of making the nation states completely irrelevant. We as entrepreneurs can solve the problems that used to be the domain of the nation states, such as disrupting healthcare, disrupting education, completely providing the affordable and clean energy. And once we do that, we can get rid of everything that we fight over and bring the world peace, because what we fight over is land, water, and energy. Imagine all we have to do is look up in the space. We have abundance of land. Remember, we are a tiny pale blue dot just in our own galaxy. And there are billions of galaxies in our universe. And who knows, there are billions of universes in this multiverse. So where is the scarcity of land? There is nothing but water up there and energy. Even on planet Earth, more energy falls in 90 minutes than we use in the whole year. So there is abundance of energy. So let's work together and let's create abundance of everything like an oxygen so we never fight over it.
Sounds like a great plan. And Randy, your job is to kind of find people and companies that are looking to do what Naveen does. So you've been an investor, your company has been an early investor in SpaceX, Tesla, and Twitter, right? So
yes.
Maybe kind of give us an idea of what you're looking for when you invest in a company. What inspires you to put money behind that?
So we look for creative geniuses like Naveen that are here to drive change the world, make it better, improve society, do it through the use of new technologies and new sources of innovation. We got involved with SpaceX about 8 years ago, Tesla around the same time, and what we saw in the vision that Elon had around those companies as an example is we saw someone who hadn't come from those industries but was so not jaded or tainted by conventional wisdom, but was willing to lead the way and bring new technologies to life in industries that hadn't really seen fundamental innovation or transformation in decades.
Right, and now, SpaceX just relaunched a booster that they had already flown to space. And speaking of moonshots, a couple of months ago, SpaceX says they're taking tourists around the moon as early as next year. So what is it like to see them succeed after, putting your money behind them so long ago?
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey for sure. And I think when we invested, it was hard for us, I think, at least for me personally, to really get my arms around the vision of we're going to Mars. We're going to colonize Mars. But what that vision did was instill an inspiration in the company and the people there and a guidepost, if you will, for the things that they needed to achieve to get there. So to get to Mars, you have to do so many things differently than what we've done historically. That's really a part of the inspiration and the innovation that they brought to the table. They were going to apply new technologies that industry hadn't seen brought together, really no real change in 40 or 50 years. And do that with the mission of we're gonna colonize Mars, we're gonna take people to Mars. But what they had to do to get there was to totally transform this industry in a way that was allowed them to not only take technology forward, but to build a business that is at scale and profitable and took market share in a way that allows them to become now a true leader in that market.
Well, if I may say so, I mean, I love Elon and I love Jeff. Both are our neighbors at Cape Canaveral, so we are in good neighborhood there. But truth be told, they're all underachievers and unambitious people. And let me tell you why. They're all stuck in the low Earth orbit so far, and we are going to the moon this year. The only company in the universe that has a permission to leave Earth orbit and land on the moon. So when we talk about underachievers, that's where we put Elon and Jeff and Richard, right? So, but someday when they can land on the moon, they can come talk to me about it.
Right.
It is a travesty that we have not been to the moon in nearly 50 years.
It's true.
We've done nothing but kind of step backwards, from the moon to the shuttle and the space station and now low Earth orbit. In some ways, we haven't really advanced the ball that far.
Actually, that is incorrect. What happened, the government hasn't advanced the ball. What government has actually done is really, really smart, which is to essentially allow the private companies to take over from here, because what they've done is proven the underlying technology works, and now you need to commercialize it and create a business around it. So if I can rephrase John F. Kennedy, I would sound like something like this. We chose to go to the moon not because it's easy, because it's a good business. And that's why we do it, because it's a good business.
And Naveen, what you were talking about earlier is last year, Moon Express got the first regulatory approval from the government to go to the moon. And like you were saying, no private company has done this before. And a big kind of catalyst for you guys is this competition, the Google Lunar X Prize competition, which basically just laid out, go to the moon, do it however you want, and then when you get there, we'll give you $20 million. So talk a little bit about that model and how that's a good way of inspiring companies to do big things.
So I'm on the board of X Prize Foundation, and really the idea is to use the incentive prizes to crowdsource the innovation. That means, can you have a goal post just so high where the entrepreneurs around the world will go out and solve your problem? And here's what we found, as Steve pointed out, Randy pointed out that there is rarely, most of the times, the winner of these competition rarely comes from the industry. Because if you are sitting in the audience and you're trying to start a company, and you say, well, I don't know much about it. That is the biggest strength you have, is you know nothing about it. If you are an expert in the field, you can only incrementally improve it. But if you want to disrupt something, you have to fundamentally challenge the foundation of everything that people have taken for granted. So if you know nothing about it, that is the skill you have, and never ever underestimate it. I am not a rocket scientist who started Moon Express, and my next moonshot is really in the healthcare, where we are fundamentally changing and imploding the whole healthcare system that's designed around to suppress the symptom. And our whole thought was, what if we can understand what's happening inside your gut, and really the Hubble telescope inside your body, understanding what's going on, and you can completely prevent all diseases. So imagine living in the world where illness is a matter of choice, not a matter of bad luck. And it is possible, and it is going to happen, and that's my next moonshot. So what I'm trying to say is, and I am not a doctor. Imagine if I can go out and do these multiple industries, so can you. So all I ask you is, please think, what is your moonshot? What will you dedicate your life to? Find something that you're willing to die for and live for it.
Well, on top of that, well, what do you have to say? I mean, I'm sure this idea of non-experts coming into a field and kind of revolutionizing, I'm sure that's not always taken so optimistically from people that are in the field. What do you say to, I'm sure Elon has gotten his fair share of criticism for not being a rocket scientist. What do you say about that kind of criticism and yeah?
I think Naveen makes a great point, is we tend to see entrepreneurs are often young and energized, and they see something that's just not right in the world to them. something that's wrong that they believe they can fix because they're bringing new creative ideas, call them the creative spirits, to these industries that may not have seen change in quite a while. And so I think the creativity, the audacious goals, something that seems impossible to make it possible, to bring new life to tired or lethargic markets or industries, and then, of course, to bring technology and innovation to bear to help facilitate that change. And so I think that, the entrepreneurs themselves, they tend to be folks that, as I mentioned, are not coupled to or jaded by conventional wisdom. They ignore the status quo. They believe anything is possible, and they are terrific leaders. So it's not enough to be visionary. You also need to be a leader. You need to have charisma to get other folks to follow you, believe in that vision, and march to battle with you.
Right. And you were talking about making these nation states irrelevant, right? And we had talked earlier about a new way of kind of following entrepreneurs and kind of holding them to task. So can you talk a little bit about that?
What I was suggesting was that think about it today. Not only we have access to the technology and resources that allows us to go out and challenge and solve the problems, whether it is around poverty or healthcare, energy, or space, or even national security. The second thing that's really most important is entrepreneurs can be held responsible every single day, not every election cycle. We elect an idiot, you're stuck with an idiot, not with an entrepreneur, because you can hold them responsible every single day, right? So when Uber steps out of line, you delete Uber, they fall right back in line. When Bill O'Reilly steps off the line, he's a step off the air, right? So you can hold entrepreneurs responsible every single day. And the third thing is that if you think about it, there are no geographical boundaries when it comes to entrepreneurship. People work together from around the world. So at Moon Express, the rocket that we are using is built by an entrepreneur in New Zealand. It didn't matter to us because we are not a nation state. And the fourth thing is capital is not patriotic. Capital flows wherever the opportunities are. So at Moon Express, we are funded by the entrepreneurs in Russia, the entrepreneurs in China, the entrepreneurs in India and Europe and America. We all came together to go to the mission to make sure that our humanity is never become extinct, to make a multi-planetary society and save the humanity from extinction. How is that for a moonshot?
And when it comes to, the audience today, let's say they want to do their own moonshot. What is the fundamental way to go about it? What kind of defines that? Is it just the goal and not being beholden to a method? What do you think is really the fundamental of that idea?
First thing is it has to be driven by a purpose and a mission. And never believe that doing good and doing well are somehow mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, the only way to do well in the long term is to do a tremendous good in the world. So find one problem that impacts 1 billion people and you can create a $10 billion company out of it. So find something that you care enough. So ask yourself when you're starting a company, God forbid, if I'm actually successful in doing what I'm trying to do, is it going to move the needle? Is it going to help 1 billion people around the world? If the answer is no, don't do it. Your life is too precious to be wasting on something too small. So have an audacious goal and then believe in it so much that you're willing to let your last drop of blood to be given to that cause, and that attracts other great people to come together to help us solve that problem. But you got to believe in yourself, and don't worry how little you know about it, because the people you can surround yourself, they're going to tell you where the minefields are, and you as a leader is got to say, I understand the minefield and I'm going to step right in there and show you there is no minefield there.
I was going to say, let me give a recent example of the do good and do well and the symbiotic relationship that those two things have. We're investors in a company called Planet.
Right.
Planet started with this audacious goal, not unlike going to Mars, that they were going to image the planet Earth every day. Give us basically a raster scan of the Earth every day so that we could detect the development of crops and agriculture around the world, the movement of goods, so economic reasons for that, the pace of deforestation and ecologic harm that we may be causing to the planet. And so that was the vision for them. But that's doing good. How do you do well? They went out and invented, literally with what we carry, this computer that we carry in our pocket today has more power than the entire Apollo space program had in the 60s and early 70s. And they were able to put this on a satellite, a small sat, very inexpensively, and give us images of the Earth with low-cost, commercial-grade components. And all of a sudden, here we are, several years later, they have now launched more than 200 satellites. They have more satellites in orbit than any company in history. And they are very close now to giving that 50 trillion pixel image of the Earth every day. So we can detect what might be coming in terms of agricultural distress, so we can solve hunger problems by making sure we get water to the right places and so forth. So the point is they were doing good with their idea, and they did well by building a business that now is totally disruptive in low Earth orbit with costs that are 2 orders of magnitude or more lower than the traditional ways of imaging the Earth because they were able to use new, innovative technologies and low-cost commercial parts, which also was never really done in the space industry in the past.
But one of the things the criticism that you always hear is there are so many problems on Earth. Why focus on space? Why are such brilliant minds focused on space when there are so many problems on Earth? And I can tell you why. Because to some extent, it's not the question of this or this. A smart person will tell you you can do this and this. So you never have to choose. Given an option, take both. But there is also, think about, we as humanity live in a single spacecraft, and this spacecraft is called planet Earth. And we're flying in the space. It is extremely dangerous place. It's only a matter of when, not if, we get hit by an asteroid. And if we do, we're all going to become a dinosaur. And if you don't believe me, ask any dinosaur that's rolling up in their graves. The first thing they're going to asking each other, what if they had one good entrepreneurial dinosaur, they'll still be around somewhere living on the moon or the Mars, but they just didn't have that foresight on a good entrepreneurial dinosaur. So let's not be that dinosaur. And we can, in fact, the point is you can make a good amount of business, a great business out of it. For example, when we go to the moon, we can get the tremendous amount of resources which are right on the surface of the moon, all the asteroids that has been collected by the moon in the last billions of years. We can collect the asteroidal riches, which are platinum-grade material, which is all the rare earth elements, and helium-3. A small quantity of helium-3 could power the planet for generations to come, and is completely non-radioactive. Even if we just bring the moon rocks could completely replace the diamond industry. Diamonds are not rare on the Earth. It's simply made rare, a symbol of love by the marketing of De Beers. Imagine when we bring the moon rocks, here is our marketing campaign. Make diamond the commodity. How? Everyone gives someone a diamond. If you love her enough, you give her the moon. Don't promise her the moon, give her the moon. And the girl gets up and says, I'm not going to marry you for diamond. I thought you loved me. Because if you loved me, you would have given me the moon.
But also there's some...
And then you take then the real honeymoon is about you taking your honey to the moon. That's a honeymoon. Others are going to call honey Hawaii.
Well, and adding to that, the premise behind Moon Express is the mining of the moon. And there are ways that mining the moon could potentially help other space endeavors, like creating fuel depots or even using the moon as a place to launch from. So, in terms of what you guys have been doing, yeah, you have this moonshot idea, but it can also lead to other
So
other
I
things.
love, what Randy and his team, Elon is doing about the Mars. Don't get me wrong. Mars is a better ultimate destination. But remember, the problems of living on the moon are very similar than living on the Mars, which is a high temperature difference, low gravity, and massive radiation. If you can solve those problems on the moon, we can take that technology and implement them on the Mars. And now you will all agree with me, it's better to be a lunatic 3 days away than to be a Martian 6 months away, right? So we'll all rather be a lunatic, set up everything, and live on the moon. And there is no doubt in my mind, in the next 20 years, there is going to be a child born on the moon where the parents are sitting next to the child and saying, son, we come from that planet.
I think, why would we not want to be a multi-planet
Absolutely.
Society and civilization, right? It just seems like the next natural step. We all grew up with Star Trek as Trekkies or Star Wars and that vision. But if you think about it now, we're getting awfully close. And it's really driven by entrepreneurs like Naveen and like Elon and like Will Marshall at Planet, who are inspiring us to do things that we didn't think were possible even a decade ago. And by doing that, we now give ourselves, I think about it as a safety valve. So if we get things really wrong on this planet and space doesn't help us survive as a society here, it gives us a safety valve for somewhere to go when we need the next place to inhabit and colonize.
But also, I mean, ironically, Elon's moonshot is a Mars shot. But in his pursuit of Mars, there have been all of these other technologies that have been created, or he's done new innovations, and those can be applied to other areas. So what are some of the other areas that Elon is kind of inadvertently disrupting by going to Mars,
I mean, that's a good question. There's a lot of innovation that's happened even at the company. I don't really want to speak for Elon in that sense and what's coming in the future, but I would say that if you look at what they've accomplished in just the last decade, the things that they've done have really transformed the existing markets that are in today and are really making possible the future as we know it. I won't take it as a SpaceX, but if you look at what Tesla and what Solar City have done also, they are really enabling us to very quickly have a more sustainable environment and economy here, but they're doing it by doing what you have to do, actually, in a commercial business. You have to give consumers what they want. And consumers, what we found out early on, at least in these markets, consumers don't buy sustainability just to do it. They don't pay more for it. They don't go green just to go green because they're going to feel better about the environment. You have to give them high performance and high reliability and low cost so that they don't come out of pocket for anything more, and then they want to feel good about it if they can adopt these new technologies. So you really have to innovate and come down these cost curves, give people new and better technologies, but not expect them to pay more, because that model doesn't really work.
Other thing I was going to tell you, Lauren, was that if you think about the beauty of being on the moon has plenty of water, especially on the South Pole. When we crashed, so what does America does best? Bomb. And so we bombed the moon a couple of years ago, and on the South Pole, and we actually crashed a couple of satellites when they ran out of their life, and we saw the plumes of water come out of the moon. When you have water, amazing things happen. The ingredients of water are hydrogen and oxygen. That's the rocket fuel and the fuel for humanity. So imagine if we can now have the fuel depot on the moon orbit, so you don't have to carry all the fuel from Earth. 93% of the weight of the rocket is just the fuel to leave the Earth's gravity. So imagine if we had reusable rocket and we had just enough fuel to get to the next fuel depot, and we can reduce the cost of doing so to go into the space someday. As Elon says, it could be $100,000 to go to the Mars. And I believe it'll be $10,000 or less to go to the moon. And imagine in 10 years, $10,000 to go to the moon. And it becomes actually sometimes easier to go to the moon and then to go to, say, from here to Sydney. Right? And I believe that technologies are coming along, whether it's an M drive that can take you to the moon in 4 hours, or something like ion propulsion that can take you to the moon in 30 minutes. So it'll be faster to get from Earth to the moon someday than to go from Earth to New York.
Well, one of the technologies that you were asking about, what's already been proven, is reusability.
Yeah. Right.
So SpaceX just proved reusability. It's kind of amazing with all of the rockets that have been launched around the world into space over the last 50 years. We call them expendable launch vehicles, ELVs. Why were they expendable? You're just throwing away all the cost. Most of the cost, the vast majority of the cost in a rocket is, at least in the SpaceX case, in many vehicles' case, is the first stage, because that's where most of the engines are. That's the fuel that gets expended. So if you can actually launch them from Mars with no atmosphere, you save a lot there too. I'm sorry, from the moon.
Yeah.
But reusability was a key stepping stone to enable us to do these missions both to the moon and especially to Mars, because if you get there, you want to be able to come back. You want to have that choice. And reusability enables all of that. And that's literally just proven in the last month and a half.
All right, well, we're running out of time, but
But before we do, let's ask the audience, how many of you in this room will go out and take your own moonshot? Raise your hand or stand up. Come on. Thank you very much and really appreciate every one of you. Go out and never let someone tell you you are crazy, because if they don't tell you you're crazy, you're not thinking big enough. So think so big that people think you're absolutely crazy, and never be afraid to fail, because the only time you're going to fail in life is the day you give up. Everything else is just a pivot.
All right. Well, I hope we inspired a bunch of lunatics today. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. What a pleasure.
Wow. Now that everybody is properly inspired to take your moonshot, I bet you're wondering how to get from point A to point B in starting that company. Well, next up, get insider advice from startup culture and growing early-stage companies from a tech trailblazer. In conversation with the editor behind the Forbes Midas list, Alex Conrad, please welcome the CEO of the foremost source of startup data, Jagger McConnell of Crunchbase. Welcome them to the stage.
All right. Let's do this. Jagger, you're the CEO of Crunchbase. I assume everyone in this room has heard of Crunchbase. Hey guys, raise your hands if you've checked Crunchbase in the last week or so.
Yeah, love it.
All right. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you very much.
So how long have you been running Crunchbase?
It's been about a year and a half. We spun out of America Online in 2015 in September, and that's when I joined.
Okay, and so for people who've been checking Crunchbase for years, what would you say is the focus or the mission for Crunchbase in the Jagger era?
Yeah, I love that. So right now we are sort of the master record of startups, and all of the people associated with startups, so investors, the companies that acquire them. As we kind of look to the future, can we become the master record of companies? Can we be that LinkedIn for companies, the place that you're always going to go to find companies for whatever purposes you have, whether it be investing or where you want to work, but maybe it's also where you want to go and sell to, maybe who you want to partner with. And that brings a whole new challenge, a whole set of challenges that we need to sort of circumvent and get through to become that master record.
When you joined Crunchbase, was there anything about the data set that you guys have, or just sort of what's really happening behind the scenes, that was really surprising, even for someone who was trying to get to know the company from the outside? Because obviously we all do check Crunchbase impulsively, but we maybe don't know exactly what is available there.
For sure. So when I joined, Crunchbase was really a lookup tool. So you can go and do searches based on the names that you know, the companies that you know. You'd have to know what you're kind of looking for before you use Crunchbase. When I walked in the door, it became really obvious that there was a lot of latent value just hiding behind the scenes. You could see trends. You can see what was happening in certain industries, what was happening with employee moves, and who's doing what, our company's growing, shrinking. All that data is just hiding underneath the surface of Crunchbase. So one of the missions that I thought we
Which one of us is that?
I know.
It's probably me.
I'm doing all right? All right, good. One of the missions was, let's go and unlock some of that latent stuff that's hiding underneath it, that value to our actual users, who can go and say, how is investment in Bitcoin changing over time? That was stuff that was really easy for us that our users couldn't do, and that was kind of the eye-opening stuff that I found when I joined.
So, at its core, when we're going to Crunchbase, do you find that people are usually going to be checking a specific company, or are they looking to learn really quick about a sector? Like, as a reporter, we have to fake that we know what's going on all the time.
Right.
So I might be checking Crunchbase, right before a meeting with a VR company to try to learn as much about what happened in VR investment in the past year as possible. And I probably don't fool anybody, but at least I try.
Right.
What do you see people mainly going to the site for right now?
Sure. So certainly when we spun out, it was about, again, lookup. Now, I would say probably half of our traffic are people doing research, trying to figure things out. So we have a new search tool. That search tool allows you to go and say, show me what's happening in a certain industry. And that is, again, probably half of our search traffic now. There's 30 million users using Crunchbase. A huge percentage of them are doing sort of fundamental, basic research now.
So what's the coolest thing that you've looked up lately? What have you seen on your own
Yeah,
site?
sure. So when you think about what happened in Q1, we actually just raised funding. So we just raised our B. So I was doing a lot of research on kind of what was happening with funding to do that. And it was really obvious that Q1, we recovered from Q4. So Q4 was pretty awful. It was down about $8 billion of sort of standard investment globally. And in Q1, we recovered. But if you kind of double click on the recovery, you'll find that a lot of the investment is going internationally now. So if you look at just Silicon Valley itself, there's still a really dramatic decrease in how much funding is going into Silicon Valley, but you'll see a dramatic increase in geos like China and Beijing. That tripled from 8 billion to 6 billion to 18 billion in the last year. Like, that's a dramatic increase when the total global funding is sort of a pretty small fraction of that. Like, it's a huge part of that funding that went to China, and that almost directly came out of Silicon Valley. So in that same period, we saw about a $7 billion decrease in funding from Silicon Valley. So that was an interesting thing that I found. And the sort of Series A, Series B, Series C, those funding rounds are decreasing, but the sizes of them are increasing. So the dollars coming out are being more sort of cautiously spent. But when they find a winner, they're trying to invest more heavily in those winners.
So fewer companies after the Series A are getting funded right now than what you saw when you joined?
That's right.
Okay. And how much of a lag would you say there is between the data that you guys are able to crunch, pun intended, and, God, it's right before lunch. No, but what's the lag between the data that you guys can process and what you think actually would be relevant to entrepreneurs in the audience who might be wanting to adapt their strategy to the trends that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think the data that entrepreneurs typically want are who are the investors who are investing in my sector, at what rate, most recently, who's investing in my competitors, that sort of stuff. That's pretty real time. So one of the joys of Crunchbase is you hear about a funding round, it's usually in Crunchbase immediately afterwards. So that is where we're very, very strong. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that funding rounds don't always get announced. So sometimes we'll have a trickle effect. A good, I want to say half of our funding comes in after the fact. And every quarter, it's basically 25% of that remaining half gets into Crunchbase. So we might not hear about a funding round, especially the Series C and Series A, for a good 6 months to a year, because that's, if you keep it private, there's no way for us to know about it.
So last year, I wrote an article about a startup that I thought was really interesting, taking on Mixpanel, called Heap. They were backed by NEA and I think Menlo Ventures.
We're a customer.
Okay, so yeah, cool company.
Yeah.
And I think they just raised their A. And I'm talking to them, and I'm like, okay, why raise this money right now? And the founder kind of like laughed at me, and I was wondering why. And he goes, well, we raised this money 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I found that amazing. And I said, why are we talking right now if you raised this money 6 months ago? And he goes, we were busy.
Yeah.
We didn't think that press mattered, or we didn't think people needed to know about the funding.
Right.
Why, do you see that hurting companies in any way, or do you see any change in sort of how companies think about announcing and putting out their funding to the world?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. In Heap's case, actually, I don't know Heap's case, but sometimes you want to be stealth, and it's actually, you don't want your competitors to know that you have this unfair advantage right now, so you might keep it secret for a while. It's usually a good idea to be public about it, because you do often get press, especially at the Series B, Series C, Series D level. You want to get it out there. You want people to know that you are thriving. It's a good recruitment tool, honestly, if you're thinking about how to get people to come and work at your company. Seeing that you have gotten to that next level is a huge recruiting benefit. So that's typically why people will be pretty forthcoming about their funding rounds. But there are exceptions to that rule, one of which is it can get distracting if you're blowing up.
What about the sense of just like fatigue or dilution? Like, I don't know how many people in this room have tried to pitched the press recently or something like that, but it seems like, just in my experience at Forbes, Series A rounds happen so frequently that sort of none of them really necessarily resonate the way they might have a few years ago, that there's sort of a saturation of funding news in the market. Now, all that funding news is ending up on Crunchbase. So what do you guys see there, and what would you advise for people who want to resonate?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get press super interested in your funding round unless something very unusual is happening. I'm sure you would attest to that. Crunchbase is a good way to announce it in a lot of ways because we do highlight Series A companies all the time. We've got a newsletter where we go and talk about them. We'll put them as featured funding if it's usually a Series A or higher. So we are a good vehicle that if you can't get press talking about your stuff, maybe we're a way to get it done. And the nice thing about that is when you enter in your Series A funding round in a Crunchbase, there is this whole series of investors who want to invest in Series Bs who are looking at for a funnel, right? And now your company fits a certain set of criteria, they now are going to find you. They're probably going to reach out to you and maybe start a dialogue because they want to see if you're someone that they want to invest in if you get to the next level.
So how good would you say, what grade would you give the accuracy of the data on Crunchbase?
Yeah, I mean, at spin out, I would give us like a C, honestly. Like we had a lot of things we had to do when we first spun out. Now, a year and a half later, I'd give us probably a B, B+. I think any data provider in the world is going to, if they say they're an A, they're lying. Like there's just no way to be perfect at data. So the thought is let's go and improve how we collect data. It's not just community focused. Let's go and find other ways of getting data in and validating our data to get that grade higher and higher. We have a lot of internal metrics on how we gauge and make sure that we have the highest possible quality data because so many, not only of our users and our customers use our data, but we also have other services and software that's consuming our data and using it as their master record in their own software. So we have to be as good as we possibly can.
So the same people who check Crunchbase here, at this point, maybe are likely also checking another data provider.
Sure.
And there are several, some send very punchy, maybe like controversial email newsletters. Mm-hmm. Others are trying like big partnerships, but it seems like there's a thirst to take on Crunchbase as sort of the repository for startup funding data or just general data. How do you see Crunchbase differentiating, and also how would you rate their quality relative to you guys right now?
Sure. So it's a tricky question for me because I'm totally biased. But the reality is that many of those companies are customers of ours. So you might be surprised of the people that they say they're competitors of ours. Really, they might be already paying us to consume our data. So that is a important part of the story, is that we really feel like we are the primary source of this data, and other people who build value on top of our data set feel the same way, so they don't have to replicate it. There are also companies that scrape our data. We certainly have plenty of people scraping. There are whole services set up around just scraping our data and reselling it to other providers. That's illegal, but it is something that people can do. So the reality is I don't see any of those other folks as competitors because I know that if they win and Crunchbase were to go away, they actually don't have the source of data because they don't have the same data fees that we do. We've got hundreds of thousands of people contributing in funding data into our systems. We have, of course, we are the destination, so that's where people put the data in. We have 3,000 partnerships with VCs all over the world sending us their portfolio data directly. And those VCs don't want to have 5 different partnerships with companies like ours. They want to do it with the one primary source. And that means that we are the only ones that learn about that data. So the only way to get it is to scrape it from us, which is just part of the deal.
And so you had kind of learned a lot about sort of startup culture firsthand with Salesforce.
Yeah.
You guys also, Salesforce maybe is the master of marketing things before they fully exist.
Right.
So I'm curious, like, how has your experience, going from an executive at Salesforce to running Crunchbase maybe informed where you see Crunchbase going, and what cultural lesson from Salesforce kind of is top of mind as you try to take Crunchbase, forward now?
Sure. So maybe that's just worth me doing a little bit of a history lesson on me. So I was at a bunch of startups back until 2004, and that's when I joined Salesforce. And I was at Salesforce for about 11 years. It was a very long time. I joined when it was 400, 500 people, and I left when it was about 20,000. So I saw a lot of change in that process. When I left, I was the head of product of the core Salesforce automation product. So accounts, contacts, leads, opportunities, forecasting, territory management, all that sort of stuff that salespeople use were all in my product line. And so when I came to Crunchbase, my pitch, if you will, of trying to get that job was, you're not a data company. Like, we're actually, Crunchbase is an application company, and we are going to build applications in a way that no one has built applications before, where we think about our data as the primary value that we're extracting through these applications. Whereas Salesforce is empty when you get it, let's go and have Crunchbase have all this data filled in there, and let's go and essentially allow this data to be extracted out to our users in a new way that no one's really seen before. So that, like, the Salesforce education from my perspective on the product side was, can we go and build applications that had inherent value before I put anything into it, which is something that was a constant challenge that we had at Salesforce.
Now, when we think of like things that Crunchbase could do, or how you maybe actually apply that, like I'm trying to think what these apps would be. Maybe you could give us an example or two. But could a place like Crunchbase ever track companies by culture or by diversity? Like, could there be a scorecard that isn't just how much money you've raised and who invested in the company?
For sure. So this is what I was sort of saying, is like, how do you get to be that master record of companies? And this is actually some big changes that are happening later this year, where we have a choice. The choice is, do we go and try to find all that data? That's an example. Maybe you care about website traffic or tech stack or how many patents they have or what jobs they have open. All those different things are slivers of what a company is. How do we go and get all of that data? And we could go and just try to crawl it and find it. But the reality is that because we are a channel, because we have all these users, we're able to go and form partnerships with lots of different data providers. So we're launching this thing called Crunchbase Marketplace there this year. And essentially, as a user, you're going to be able to say, look, I'm looking for a job. I want to know who got funded, sure. But do they have back-end engineering jobs available too? Like, that's interesting for me. Or maybe I'm a salesperson. I like to find companies that maybe just got funded, but also that they run on AWS, or they have a certain amount of website traffic, because I run Heap, and I want to go and have insights into how much traffic they have. So let's combine lots of these data sources into one thing. And that is, the way we're able to do that is actually a lesson I learned at Salesforce, which was build a platform. Build a platform that can handle and customize and be whatever you need it to be, whatever our users need it to be, and bring that to them and say, now we have this app exchange of data, if you will, which allows you to go and choose the things that you want as part of your Crunchbase experience. And that's not just, let's talk about startups. Now no one cares about who invested in Bayer Corporation in the 1800s, but let's go and have all this data around every company in the world. And that's something that just doesn't exist today. And I think our users, we hear this all the time, I wish you had a lot more companies. It's not just about startups. I want companies everywhere, in every geo. And that's the sort of stuff that we're bringing to the table.
So if I'm a company that's doing things the right way, let's say I'm ahead of the sort of woeful industry averages in diversity, would I get some sort of badge of recognition, theoretically, on Crunchbase? Like, how do I avoid being just company, 5,000 that has raised between $2 and $7 million?
Yeah. So this is one of our plans, is to go and have a deeper engagement with the companies themselves. Because we think it is important that companies engage and sort of highlight their strengths and let people know about what they're doing that's exciting. That diversity thing is a particularly challenging problem because you need to know the genders of employees to do that correctly, certainly from an automated standpoint. So that's another good place where maybe we would partner rather than trying to solve that challenge. We do track gender information on founders. So I can tell you, for instance, that of the companies that started last year, about 17% of them had female founders.
How would 17% having a female founder compare to a couple of years ago?
It's actually pretty terrible, if you want to know the truth. From 2012, don't totally quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's 2012 to 2017, it's been consistently 17% of new companies have female founders. Whereas if you look at 2009 to 2012, it almost doubled. It went from 9% to something like 17%. So that trend of it increasing, which was great from 2009 to 2012, flatlined in 2012 to 2000 and now. And that is not awesome. So obviously you'd expect that to continue. I don't have a good answer as to why it flatlined, but it did. And I think that's something that we should all be paying attention to. And I mean, obviously there's tons of, like, when you talk about diversity and you know, Salesforce as an example, again, is doing a lot to improve their culture by trying to normalize the discrepancies that they had there. Again, at Crunchbase, we're at almost 50% women in our company, which I think is pretty awesome. That's a goal that we had when we spun out. So that is something that every company is struggling with, but it's on our community, the investor community, the startup community, to try to fix this wrong of 17%, because I don't think that's good enough, frankly.
So I think it was a year or two ago, one of the biggest venture capital firms, or just better known, First Round Capital, they scanned the data on every portfolio company they'd ever invested in. And they found pretty consistently that companies with a female co-founder outperformed the other companies. They were more likely to raise follow-on capital. They were more likely to survive. You guys can, like, theoretically slice your data to see who gets follow-on funding, who kind of keeps showing signaling that they're doing well.
Right.
Have you guys been able to compare companies by their diversity or by sort of the amount of funding or just any sort of these metrics to kind of come up with a taxonomy of a healthy company today?
Yeah, I personally don't know them off the top of my head. I know we have done a lot of analysis here, so I know we just recently did an analysis on the percentage of partners who are women out of the top 100 VC firms. And again, like, in your mind, like, what do you think that percentage is of how many women are partners in the top 100 VC firms? If you guessed 7%, you would be right, and like, that's not good, you know. And so we absolutely have that sort of number in the numbers in Crunchbase, and we have something called Crunchbase.news where we kind of do that analysis, and we'll go and post it out there and let people sort of see the discoveries that we're making on our own data set.
So yeah, I mean, we grapple with this. You know, I was introduced, I guess, as the editor of the Midas list, which, if you guys don't know, is the top 100 VCs by returns. And there were 6 women this year. Yeah. The year before, there were 5. If you spin it one way, that's the most ever. If you spin it the reasonable way, it's a woefully low number.
Yeah.
And that really upsets me. But then when I also am going by the returns, you have to ask, you know, okay, well, what changes first that is not the case? So I think for if I'm a founder today, should I be... Is there empathy at Crunchbase? Is there a way for a company to actually, you know, live as more than just a number and sort of a tag in this, I think, extremely crowded startup world today?
Yeah, you know, just being honest, there isn't. Like, you can go and change the description. You can go and maybe put some of your culture and your words into how the company is being described. But there isn't a way really to get that empathy across. Like, we should say, is there a nonprofit here? Like, are they part of the 111 program? Are there things that they're doing to make the world better? I love that idea. So thank you for that. But it's not something that we do today, and maybe we should do in the future.
You can give me my commission when we go backstage.
I love that.
Is there any trend that you've seen take off just sort of at the 40,000-foot view, or any area that suddenly is popping up consistently on Crunchbase that is new or exciting for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, last year had a lot around AI. As you might imagine, you certainly are hearing a lot about AI today. I don't imagine that going away anytime soon. We did see sort of like the food delivery space kind of collapse throughout the end of last year. And when you're looking at what's happening now, having teams collaborate and working together, that is a space that has been hot in the past, and there's like this resurgence of VC going into sort of workplace collaboration.
So people trying to draft off of the Slack
It's the Slack
success.
drag, that's right.
Okay.
So can I be a better Slack? Can I bring AI into Slack? You know, I think there's always this tendency to merge buzzwords together, trying to find the right combo. And I think workplace plus AI does some really cool stuff, and that's certainly what VCs are thinking about when they're investing right now.
All right, well, Jagger, thanks so much for sharing these insights with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Now we'll shift from the world of startups to harnessing the power of the internet for digital activism. Next up, we have one of social media's most famous digital creators and the CEO of GLAD to discuss media activism and the power of the internet. In conversation with Alyssa Newcomb of NBC, please welcome Tyler Oakley and Sarah Kate Ellis to the stage.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Alyssa Newcomb. I'm an NBC News tech reporter, and we are here with Sarah Kate Ellis, President and CEO of GLAD, and YouTube creator Tyler Oakley. You probably know him from his amazing videos. I think we close to 8 million subscribers.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Or afternoon. Afternoon.
Afternoon. So today we are talking about online activism and how it's kind of changing with all of these new tools we have out there. So Sarah Kate, I wanted to ask you, how has GLAD's strategy evolved with these new platforms and new audiences being reached?
Sure. Well, you know, GLAD was founded 30 years ago, and we really were the voice of the LGBTQ community. And now everybody has their own voice, their own platform. So it's been very helpful for us in that we don't have to be necessarily the watchdog that we used to be, because so many people are activists now themselves. What we can do is elevate that and bring it to even a higher platform at that moment when something is happening. But also, it's made us look at how we are activists and what we have to do in terms of building up our activism and our followers and our members, so that when we have something that we feel really important and needs to be spoken about, we can then go to a body of people and say, we've got to get on this. And we've been doing a lot of that lately. We've really shifted lately from everything on calling Ambassador Nikki Haley to talk about what's going on in Chechnya with the gay concentration camps, to releasing video on, Secretary Army potential nominee Mark Green and his view on transgender Americans and why he's not fit to serve in that position. And really getting our base then to percolate these and fight back and use their platforms then to push it further out.
And today, German Chancellor Angela Merkel called on Vladimir Putin to denounce what's going on in Chechnya with these concentration camps. And you have a pretty successful tweet out there already today about that. Can you tell everyone what you said and kind of how you're approaching that?
After we had gone to Nikki Haley and asked her to speak out about these atrocities, then Angela Merkel spoke out about it. And so what I decided to do was tweet. I've been tweeting at Donald Trump and had to silence, which we find on a lot of LGBTQ issues. But this time I said, I called the Queen herself, Beyonce, and just said, now we've gotten Nikki to speak out, we've gotten Angela, we know who really runs the world. And sort of play to that with him on trying to get him to engage on these atrocities.
And Tyler, you have used your YouTube platform for fun, but for also some really important issues.
Yeah.
What are some of the pieces of content that you're kind of most proud of when it comes to activism?
So I make videos on YouTube. I talk about my life. I've been doing it. This is my 10th year, so this has been a minute. And from the start, I never really thought I would be doing social justice work or activism things. It was just for entertainment. But then, as my audience grew, I realized that there's a potential, there's an opportunity there. There's a moment where I can have these genuine conversations and still have fun. And so the content that I'm most excited about and most proud of is that stuff. I worked with the Hillary campaign. I would go to swing states and college dorms and go door to door and make videos surprising fans and dragging them to the polls or to register and things like that. I think for me, it's finding an in-between between making that content digitally and having real-world moments of getting out there and talking face to face, and while it was started online, having those dialogues in person. So doing that work with the Hillary campaign, I think my favorite thing I've ever done, though, was with the Obamas. While President Obama was president, he had a large little crew of YouTubers come in and talk to him about how to use social media to engage with younger audiences. So we had a meeting at the White House with the president, and he was asking us for advice. And to me, that was just one of the coolest moments of realizing, like, we actually are doing something that is being recognized and is making an impact. And I hoped, more than anything, that my audience would realize that it's not just us, it's us with our audiences, and it's them, and it's because these audiences are so passionate and involved. And more often than not, my audience is younger, and seeing them care and want to get involved locally, if not nationally, has been refreshing, especially in the past 100 days. It's been great, yeah.
And how important are these personal stories that people have to share when it comes to, you know, spreading a message online or trying to get something done or get someone's attention? How important is it that you share why something means so much to you personally?
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about the power of making it personal. And I think that's why so many YouTubers are so successful and digital stars really resonate with audiences, is because it's not scripted, it's not planned often, and it's a one-on-one connection. It feels like a friend that you're watching intimately alone on your computer, as opposed to on a big screen or with friends in your living room. It feels like a personal touch. And so to hear those stories and to have them resonate, whether it's somebody like Gigi Gorgeous, who talks about her transition openly, and especially in her new documentary, it's seeing those stories and feeling a connection to them, more often than not, will have a direct impact on how they speak up as activists, how they vote. If you know somebody, it feels more personal.
Mm-hmm. And GLAAD has had a lot of success, especially recently. You managed to get the rating change for the movie Three Generations to a PG-13, which is great. Yes. I wanted to ask, what makes a campaign successful? Is there one secret ingredient that we should know about?
I wish there were one secret ingredient. It always feels like a war room when we have a campaign going on. But I think what's really important is that, from a personal standpoint, is that we know at GLAAD, it's been our secret to success, is that when you know someone who's LGBTQ, it makes it harder to hate them. When you know someone's personal story, whether they are really far right or really far left or somewhere in between or fair-minded or not so fair-minded, is that when you know someone's story, we all have struggles and we all have a personal story. When we share those personal stories, they're connectors. And that's what we need right now, is unification in this country. And so, you know, with the PG-13 rating on Three Generations, this is a movie that's opening this coming weekend. It's a Harvey Weinstein production. It has Elle Fanning in it, Susan Sarandon, and Emma Watson. And it is the story of a teenage trans young person who is transitioning. And our fight was that this story needs to be told to so many people. The widest audience is the imperative here. And so we really went to town working. What we did was we started a petition that got over 35,000 signatures, and worked with the MPAA, who issues the ratings, and talked them through why it's so important that this is open to as many audience, as big an audience as possible. Because this is the first time that a trans teenager story is being told on the big screen. And we wanted to make sure that as many people could see it. Both families who have trans people, but people, especially people who don't have trans people, because when you you know, before Caitlyn Jenner came out, only 3% of Americans said that they knew someone who was trans. And we worked very intimately with Diane Sawyer on that whole coming out story behind the scenes, because we knew that it was the largest platform ever for a trans story, and that many Americans for the first time, here in America and globally actually, were going to meet someone who was trans for the first time. And that's the work that we do, and that's why it's so important.
And what would you say to a lot of people who, especially right now in this incredibly heated political environment, 100 days into the Trump administration, what would you say to young people who want to get involved but don't quite know where to get started?
Sure. Well, we both have answers for this, I think.
Fabulous.
One is, I think, one step forward. Sharing your story, and everyone has a platform to do that, is so critical. But also, you can sign up for GLAAD.org. There are many, many organizations across the country. Find what you're passionate and interested in and sign up for it and participate in it. But also use your own platform. And we're wearing these pins today. These are about a united campaign that we're running at GLAAD, because I think that not only do we have to fight for marginalized groups, but we really have to talk to each other as Americans and find that connectiveness. And this is really about all marginalized groups coming together to protect each other, but also all Americans coming together to protect each other. And so I think that you can get involved. There are so many entry points. Just one little step can really start the ball rolling.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much happens locally and personally. Having difficult conversations with your friends, with your family. I learned so much from the internet, and I see these young people on Tumblr or on Twitter talking about intersectionality, talking about all these topics that I didn't know about when I was in high school. I didn't even know about when I was in college. And to see those conversations happening so frankly and openly is so inspiring to me. So just like you said, where everyone has an opportunity to have their platform, whether that's on YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, whatever, making sure that you are joining the conversation, but just as much that also listening. I feel like I come from a certain perspective as a white, gay, cisgender man, and there's so much I can learn from other perspectives without having to talk. I think just listening to those dialogues, listening to those conversations, and making sure that I'm conscious about what my timeline is giving me. I can so easily just follow other white, gay, cisgender men, but is that actually going to teach me anything other than what I already might know? And so being conscious about making sure that I'm including people of color on my Twitter timeline and Tumblr timeline that are having conversations that I don't think I can have any authority to speak on, but I have definite obligation in my mind to listen to, and to hopefully amplify to my own audience. Making sure you're listening, making sure you're having those dialogues, and making sure that you're putting yourself out there. And one of the coolest things, that you guys do is work with young people to become ambassadors. And I think there's so many opportunities for young people to get involved, whether that's with GLAAD, Listen, HRC, Trevor. Those are just my faves because I have a very specific interest. But organizations, no matter what you're interested in, they are going to want to work with younger people because they want to foster those voices and help them realize their potential. So getting involved locally at your school, at your college, in your family, it's brave, but it's important.
Yeah. And I'll just say to that point, we just did a research study that landed on the cover of Time magazine this past about a month ago, on youth, that looked at how youth today identify. And what I find so fascinating, I'm 45 years old. When I was growing up, being different was seen as bad. You were always trying to assimilate and be like everybody else. But today, youth see being different as good. And 20% of millennials in our study identify as LGBTQ, which is pretty staggering. So when you look at the future, and one thing that we didn't print, that we had done a study on Gen Zers, and that wasn't in this article, but 60% of them don't identify as strictly heterosexual. So this next generation that we're looking at doesn't want to be checking a box or living on a binary, and I think that businesses, in order to stay relevant and ahead of the curve, really have to take notice of this and change the way that they're thinking and that the way they're intersecting and interacting with their consumers. Because this group of kids, especially the Gen Zers, in 2020 are going to be 40% of the consumer population. That's a lot of money.
And to that point, do you feel like, you know, our lawmakers, our companies, is the media, like, are we all listening when people have something to say on the social platforms? Is there something we could all be doing better there, perhaps?
I mean, there's things that can be improved, always. I think the best way to improve it is for each of us individually to recognize that they work for us in a lot of ways. Whether that's politicians who have to listen to their constituents. More often than not, I would imagine people that are maybe oppressive could be more outspoken. So making sure that your voice is heard about who you are and what you want your constituents to, or I mean, what you want your politicians to do is so important. And making those calls, tweeting them, emailing them, writing them letters. I know that my audience, at least, is so fired up about getting involved, but they don't know how. So just making sure that you are recognizing that you can hold these people accountable. And I was hearing from social media influencers before I was hearing from the media about Chechnya. And I think because that was starting and because that was bubbling and because organizations like GLAAD were making sure we were talking about it, that's what's going to force media to discuss it and to actually pay attention.
Yeah.
And Sarah Kate, I've always been impressed that GLAAD is able to take a piece of content that's happening in real time almost and quickly turn it around. There was a Tennessee lawmaker who made a comment about LGBTQ people as parents recently, and you were able to share that clip and get it out there. How important is Twitter to what you do on a day-to-day basis?
It's incredibly important. It's essential. I mean, social platforms and digital are incredibly important now because it's where a story starts, honestly. And especially nowadays where cable news and nightly news has become Trump TV and is really controlled by the White House and how he manipulates the media. Trying to break through that clutter is incredibly hard. So with the Chechnya incident, actually, is where we started that and percolated that story because we couldn't get CNN or MSNBC to cover this topic, was on social media. And getting influencers to talk about it, getting regular everyday people to talk about it and say this isn't cool, this isn't right, we need to act as a country, as a world leader. And so eventually, once we were able to get Nikki to speak out, that's when CNN actually went behind the scenes and did a story on what was going on there. And so it's sort of the reverse effect where now what happens on social bubbles up to the national, whereas before people on social media would talk about what's happening at the national level, and it's a reverse effect now.
And we were talking beforehand about how important local news is to what you're doing. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. I think one thing that we realize in this country is that, we're a media organization, media advocacy organization at GLAAD, and so you can literally look at what shows people watch on TV and know, and you can tell who they voted for. By the shows they watch. And so what we also realized very quickly was that the local media has been underrepresented, under-thought through, and that is where people are really getting their stories and are still turning on a daily basis. They might have blocked out national news, but they are turning to their local media. And so we've been working very closely. There have been over 170 anti-LGBTQ bills in this last legislative session, and we've been working on the local level to defeat them. So in Texas, in Tennessee, there have been these we are calling them the slate of hate, up to 6 bills in each of these states. And where we've been rallying our campus ambassadors, holding rallies on the campus, and then getting the local press there, and then having them pressure the politicians to vote against these bills, has been incredibly effective.
And a lot of times, social is so great because everyone has a platform, but sometimes it can create a lot of noise. Do you have any advice for how do we cut through that?
Oh.
I mean, it is so oversaturated. I think the best piece of advice I could ever give anybody that wants to break through that is realize that you have a very unique point of view. You have a point of view that nobody else can give. And I guess speaking to your own story, because that's going to be the one-of-a-kind thing. And when you talk about why something's important, period, that might not resonate, but why it's important to you, somebody might connect with that. Or when they hear maybe your background or what happened to you at your job or things like that, I think are a much better way to connect and to get people to actually care than if you just say, this is important, care about this.
Right.
And seeing as this is a technology conference, I have to ask, are there any platforms in the future? Might we see VR activism?
Oh, God.
Yeah. That would be fun. You could march on Washington right in your living room. Just put on your glasses.
I would prefer if they got up, though, and get out there. Who knows? That is so interesting.
I mean, I would ask you guys. You're the creators. But I think no matter what the platform, no matter what the new iteration comes out, what's really critical and we know is most effective in activism is the personal connection, is the personal story. And there's no feeling that can be recreated as if you showed up in Washington, D.C. or one of the big marches back in January, and that coming together of community. I think, social platforms are a wonderful tool. Nothing will replace the personal and the connectiveness of activism, and really at the essence of that is a personal story, is someone who is living a truth that is marginalized, and we're there to fight for them.
I think a cool thing that could happen with something like VR is an opportunity to see in person, in a way, places that we feel disconnected from.
Sure.
So if something is happening on the other side of the world, VR might give us an opportunity to see firsthand that. Or even people that might be disabled, being able to experience being involved in ways that they wouldn't have been able to before. But to me, social media is something like that, where you are able to connect with those people across the world. And it's already happening right now in ways like Chechnya, where you can see it. I think that the challenge is wanting to see it and making sure people know that this is happening and you should care.
Right. And I think VR also gives the opportunity to experience what you were saying, is experience the world through the lens of someone who's marginalized. If you walked into a store as a person of color, what that experience is. So you can actually try privilege on for size and see what stripping your privilege away looks like or feels like in real time. So I think that could really bring, one of the things that we need most in this country right now is empathy. And I think that could be a marvelous vehicle for empathy.
And speaking of empathy and looking toward the future, where do we go from here?
I think, I feel very strongly we have two paths, and we have to dual track this, is that we need to continue to resist and use our social platforms to call out the administration or anything that we see that that hurts marginalized groups in this country. And the other piece of it is that we do need to unify. We have to find common ground, and we have to dig deep to do that, because we do have more in common than we think we do, and we have to call on that, I think, in the future.
I would say recognize your power. I think that's the number one thing I would ever want anybody to come away from listening to me or talking to me, is to realize that they can make a change as just one person. It's not the people with millions of followers or subscribers or whatever. It's sometimes local. It's sometimes having that one-on-one conversation that's going to make a huge change. And whether that's changing policy in your organization, being conscious of how people are listening or talking at your job or at your college or at your dorm or whatever, those things shape how people approach the world afterward. So when you graduate college, you take what you learned in your dorms, and if your dorm was inclusive and your dorm highlighted, diverse voices, you're going to take that to your job. And so starting early and making sure that locally and within our communities we're thinking about those things, that will change the world, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that is all the time we have today. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming, and thank you, Sarah Kate and Tyler.
Yes, of course.
Great discussion.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. We
Thanks,
appreciate
friends.
it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our morning sessions. The stage will now break for lunch with talks resuming at 1:30 sharp. Thank you.